looks good, looks good.
I need to log into chat to Twitch.
Alright, they're both coming in at the same time.
Okay, good.
Admit all. That's an easy button. The admit all button's much easier for me to press.
Yeah.
Look at that. Boom, boom, boom. That's going.
Yep.
Hello.
Hello, Keith.
Hello.
Hello,
welcome.
Greg. Got our Prelude ads running here. We're
Yeah,
sponsors.
you will
so
see Jay shortly when you see what's happening in Twitch.
good to see
So
you
welcome.
both.
Yeah.
Good to see you again,
See you.
Keith. It was a really great time at GaryCon.
Absolutely, and I feel like I saw you very briefly at GaryCon, Anna, if I'm remembering correctly.
Exactly. Yeah, we met. I met 3-4 times, but only
Passing.
few minutes, shake hands and stuff. And
Anna was
the first
sitting
time
at the
was at
table.
Gen Con.
Yeah, Anna was at the table during the big show we had that Wednesday night. That's
Right,
well.
no, I remember.
Yeah, it was at Gen Con like 10 years ago. That was a bunch of fans wanted me to do an Ebron map, and we shook hands very briefly, and they babbled to me, and that was it. Yeah, then we were whisked off in different directions, and that was it. Yep.
Well, I'm glad we're finally going to get a chance to talk. So
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Yep, same.
Greg, very nice to
And
meet you too.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you guys. Thanks for including me on
Of course,
Oh,
of course.
Wonderful. And I
You're like a
must admit-
phenomenon, man. Come on.
Exactly. I must admit, if I knew you would have come on more than 2 hours before this, I would have seen the Blair Witch Project. It's one of these movies I promised myself to see, never got around to see it, but it's a phenomena, so to speak. So
Yes.
yep. And now I feel ashamed for not
Oh,
watching it.
and it's okay.
That's
Yep.
We're out of here. Don't put up with this, Greg. How dare you?
Exactly. Yes.
I
Yep.
watch it like 7
Yep.
times. You know what scared
So
me?
you've made up for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What scared me was that, and I think it was History Channel, you guys ran that documentary ahead of time of the release. It looked real. Was it on
Yeah,
History
that was
Channel?
That was on Sci-Fi Channel.
Sci-Fi, that was it. Oh my God, that scared the crap out of me.
Yeah,
That was scary. That was
Hang
like,
on, something just happened. I gotta.
oh,
I gotta
okay,
check
no
on
problem.
that.
You got time.
I love the backdrop there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I thought it was a green screen, but then when he did,
Yeah.
maybe it is a green screen that is really done well. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's up, Phantom? What's up, JR? Got a really special discussion tonight. So,
Yep, Jay's.
Anna, this is number 297. We're almost to 300.
Oh, over 300. You have
Yes,
to come up with something
297
special
show
for
on it.
300. Yep.
Yeah, we did
On
6
Black
years.
Velvet Berries on the podcast we had Brian Dunning from Skeptoid on, and I think Brian is up to Skeptoid's up to episode 970 something of
Wow.
Skeptoid.
Mm-hmm.
He's closing in on 1,000 episodes.
Oh, that's wonderful.
yeah.
So if I told
I was just gonna say, I heard you mention my backdrop,
that's cool.
and yes,
Yeah.
it's my analog green screen.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's so cool.
Now that works.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, Greg,
It's hanging a little funny over here. It
That's
used to
okay.
hang much straighter, but it's
Mhm.
just fun when one of the cats comes under and it just does
Yeah.
that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yep.
Greg,
Sorry about that. My dog,
No, it's
my
okay.
dog is acting up and decided to play pharmacist in the bathroom.
Yeah, I
Knock
have
some
one.
things over.
He's not acting up at the moment, but he can act up quite a bit. So, but usually when we took a walk today, he didn't want to go anywhere. So we had a, yeah. First mile he runs like an idiot, and then was like, "No, mommy, I don't want to go anywhere." And then I had to drag him and persuade him, and oh, he's terrible. So yeah,
very cool.
but he's a puppy, so he's like a teenager. Sometimes he wants things, and then he doesn't know what he wants. And
Beyond the
yeah,
wall of worlds and along the arc of time.
but he's cute.
Well,
Where
those
are
not
you
about
based out of, Anna?
I'm in Southern California. I'm a Swede who moved to
Say
Southern
that there's
California a bit
dark
over 10 years
and there
ago.
is
So,
light.
so yeah, so I'm between
It's too
LA and
easy
San Diego,
to
but
say that there are
east
two
of the
sides
Santa
to
Ana
every coin.
Mountains. So I'm like
Reality
25, 30
is
miles
far
from the
worse.
ocean.
For a
I
law
was
flirts with
running a D&D game
Chaos
this morning,
invites
actually,
freedom.
for my Patreon supporters, and one of the players was calling from Sweden.
good.
Oh, cool.
So-
Awesome.
Suffering.
Yeah. Yeah,
Up
we're a lot of
north,
role
he said.
players
Those in the
Sweden.
middle,
So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
They are worse.
I
for
was
they know
in
nothing
Uppsala
but self.
once,
The Codex
about 10 years
Infernum
ago.
and the
For
Codex
convention
Exalted.
or
Two
through work or
swords
something?
I-
for-
bring in
just for
depth
I
fun?
was just doing a
about
thing
beings
where I
of
was
all
just
dispositions.
basically couch
From the
surfing,
farthest
just
reaches of
traveling
the heavens
around
to the
yeah.
the
darkest
world,
depths
running
of space.
D&D for people. So
Both
Yeah,
of
did
I
you,
was running
get to see
D&D
the
for
castle,
full
Uppsala
color art,
slot,
new
the castle and
creatures,
stuff?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
new
good.
powers
Yeah,
like
it's
possession,
it's a
and a
medieval
multitude of
Renaissance that has been
information
slightly
providing
modified
lore,
over the time, but it still
background,
has a
names,
lot of old
mechanics,
castle
stats, and
stuff
much more.
with it. So yeah, it
I
was.
thought it was a
These
beautiful
incredible
town.
tomes.
Oh
So,
yeah,
yeah.
oh yeah. Uppsala is beautiful. Has a lot of old. It's an old university city. The second oldest, the oldest in Sweden actually, but the second oldest in Scandinavia because Lund was a Danish city when it was founded, and for the first half of its life was a Danish city, and a Danish city, and it has an older university and stuff. But there's some old cool buildings and stuff. So yep. Mm-hmm.
So Greg, you a D&D player?
Yes, I was obsessive when I was from probably like 7th grade through my senior year of high school. I was utterly obsessed.
Uh-huh.
It kind of waned, in adulthood, and I've kind of come in and out of it a little
Yeah.
bit in 5th edition. I played with Keith recently. Keith ran me through a testing out one of his tournament modules.
It was the Incarnate tournament from Founders and Legends, and played my 4th
Nice.
edition adventure
Mm-hmm.
that I made for that.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
So a bit of a weird, weird way to jump back in after a while. But
Yeah, right in
that
the
was,
fourth.
awesome.
Yeah. Oof.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
But I've always said like Dungeons and Dragons, Star Wars definitely, started my desire to be a filmmaker, but
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons definitely like shaped how I think as a storyteller.
Yeah. It kind of- Yeah, it kind of added to your creative repertoire, so to speak, or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I think just how you think about stories.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons is just improv storytelling.
I think,
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like to me it sort of hits a few notes of it's the thing that both tells you can make your own stories. You don't just have to read other people's.
Right.
And at the same time, I mean, we all make things up when we're kids. We all make up stories and such, and we sort of grow out of it, if you will. And
Yeah.
Andy's saying you don't have to. Like again, you can get a structure, a form, an idea, but we can all make up, make compelling stories.
Unfortunately, Keith, I only learned that a couple of years ago because I've only just started writing and getting my stuff published. So.
But it's cool with D&D and role-playing games. It's a way
Yeah.
you can structuralize your creativity and storytelling as adult in whatever way you want. There are many different ways of doing it, but meaning I do my gaming now in a very completely different way I did even 25 years ago. So as my
Same
interests have evolved, my way of structuring my games and the goals and how I do it is different. So that I think that flexibility is so cool in the hobby. There's so many different ways of enjoying it.
And even just with D&D, I was just doing D&D in a castle this last month. And part of what was interesting to me is it was 10 different game masters. And all of us, you could just see from just our interactions and the materials people were preparing, we're just like, these are very different games.
Yeah.
Like the experience the players were getting is very different based on who they were playing with. And it was just interesting, just to see that, on the one hand, you have different systems that support different styles of play. But even within, any particular, especially D&D, because let's face it, it's the oldest, there's so many different ways to play.
Yeah, and meaning just the way you use rules, meaning in some games rules means almost everything. It's like I get another plus on the die roll and stuff like that. It's mechanics heavy, rules heavy, and that's the key of the game, and you can win or lose, so to speak, but it's the rules. And in other parts the rules just play a small part, and it's the stories, the narrative, the kind of the experience side of things, and the rules and the mechanics are just the necessary evil, so to speak, in order to make it. And it's a continued spectrum, and that to me in the beginning, I was like, oh, rules are everything. Now it's like the setting, the stories, the lore. That's the key bit, and the rules are definitely second fiddle, so to speak. And that has evolved for me over time.
That's something that was very interesting to me doing this 4th edition game, which I did for Founders and Legends, which, I haven't played 4th edition for, 10 years or something like that.
Keep on talking as we come live. It's all good. We're just keep on.
Yeah, and basically, I'm very much like you. I play things, about the story, whereas the 4th edition was much more like concrete, it is about, because it's more of a strategic war game.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's sort of interesting to be like, oh, right, this is where I really am caring about these details. I often don't really bother too much about.
Some people play this D&D or whatever game it is, and then where they're playing in the lore is just like, that's varnish on top of the rules. And for others, it's the other way around. For me, it's the setting and where I play is the key, and the rules is the kind of how I structure and organize it. I can switch out the rules, but I don't want to switch out the setting and the lore and the stories. I want to keep that. And so it's interesting, but there's nothing wrong either way. It's what you like to emphasize on and what your players like to.
And that's very much the point of Eberron, is saying I've played Eberron in first off 3 editions of D&D, but I've also played it in 2 completely non-D&D systems, and there's a 3rd one out people have done a conversion for, and that's the point. The story, the rules sort of support how you want to play.
It's real.
But the world and the story are relevant in any which way. And I have a cat.
It's okay. You can show your pets on stream. We're very we're very easygoing.
This guy is nice. Getting in trouble. They're
so
all
cute.
They're all a pain.
I have 2 roaming around myself, Keith. It's okay.
He is destroying my map of a lightning rail. So there you go.
Yep.
All right. Look at this. Great cast tonight. Great guests. We're going to have a fun discussion. We'll have to talk about anything, but we're here to talk about Keith's accomplishments and Gregg's accomplishments. Oh my gosh! I was when Keith reached out to me, I'm like, oh hell yeah! Bring him on. Let's introduce everyone. So you got my partner in crime, Anna B. Meyer, the legendary Greyhawk map maker. I'm J.K. Lord Gazumba, 44-year Greyhawk campaign. No big deal. So I run talk shows and host some events and have fun at GaryCon and get to introduce some great people here and have fun with this discussion. So Keith, welcome back to me meeting you for the first time, really us talking for the first time ever at GaryCon, which was really fun. So I got a lot of pictures.
Such a good time. And, again, both GaryCon overall, and I really enjoyed all the times we got to play games or hang out together.
It was a blast.
So thank you so much for having us here.
Oh, of course. I really look forward to really talking about some background on how Eberron came to be, because I know a lot of this is mostly a Greyhawk audience, but they respect all the game systems, and I guarantee there's a lot of crossover between a lot of players play Eberron. Yeah,
and we're interested in settings because we love one setting. We're interested in how settings come to be and so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just have to say that, as I'm sure Gregg can speak to as well, we're old-time D&D players. So certainly for me, I started with the white box, and I started with Barrier Peaks and, against the Giants and Vault of the Drow. So, I'm just saying, Greyhawk certainly has a place in my heart, for sure.
Yeah.
And I imagine there is some crossover with Eberron and up in the north, Anna, right, with the Egg of Coot and all that up there, because there's a lot of automatons
we'll see, because there's some interesting stuff that I was going to say. We need to dig into that. Yep.
Barrier Peaks was always one of my favorite.
Nice.
I think I was asked what my favorite traditional thing was, and I think I said Barrier Peaks because I loved that as a kid.
There you go.
In part because of the inherent clash, the inherent, like, you're getting chocolate in my peanut butter.
Yeah,
definitely.
So that certainly has to have a little bit of inspiration there with that.
That's awesome.
Fantastic. Yep. And our other guest, who was a surprise even for me a day ago.
Yeah.
And If you look into Gregg Hale's background, one of the creators and producers for Blair Witch Project, correct?
Yep. I was one of the producers on Blair Witch Project with guys that I went to film school with, and definitely was a nice little career boost for me. And have stayed a horror filmmaker. Always stayed very influenced by Dungeons and Dragons, like we were talking about before we got started. And now I've been lucky enough to work with Keith on a game.
Yes.
Glim, that's part of a new project that I guess we'll talk about at some point. But
well, part of what I would speak to, though, just sort of touching on everything we've said and how this is directly relevant, is Gregg came to my partner Jen and I last year because Gregg and his partners are developing a setting called Hada, the Emerald Anvil, and the point is you're developing a world. But it is a world that you're exploring through different media, including podcast, books, and with us, games. And so that's sort of the point, is we're on the other side of this screen, sort of primarily used to world building for games. But world building, again, has many different, any sort of fiction, any sort of media. World building's a part of that. So I can just speak to the fact that I've seen, far more of it than since these projects are just coming out. I've seen Hada and the world that you've created, Gregg. And, to me, again, that's the exciting part. It's seeing this world come to life. And so I'm just saying, whether it's games or fiction, we're all people who are creating worlds and engaging with worlds.
So I'm going to press this button multiple times. That is a link to the Emerald Anvil site and the link to the Kickstarter for Glim, the board game. I'm going to do that multiple times, all right? So please go. The Kickstarter's not up yet, so it'll give you
starts in a couple days.
It'll give you a registration. I think there was like 307 when I checked. I'd love to see another 20 to 30 tonight, everyone. So please get on there and get at least and minimum. So, yeah, I know. We all can't wait till next GaryCon. So
yeah, we'll talk about that. Talk about it later, because I'd love to tell you more about Glim and where we're going with it. But it's something we're really excited about.
Fantastic. But first thing I want to do is I want to get the ball busting out of the way there, Keith. So here, I'm going to show this picture, and then because you busted my stones during that talk show on Wednesday. Go ahead. There we are playing yourself, me, Garner, and go ahead, say it. My good friend Todd Stashwick.
Oh, we're good friends. Yeah, I'm Todd Stashwick.
Yeah. But so that was the first time.
I believe it's your best friend. Todd.
Exactly. Yeah, I knew he was there.
Took me a moment.
Yeah, that's Todd. Look, Todd is a wonder. Yeah, Progcore. We're gonna have Todd on for Progcore too. Trust me on that. So yeah, we'll have him on. But this is the first time we ever played. But we'll get into that. Just wanted to share that picture. That's from Gary.
I mean, it's your best friend. You have to.
He is a great guy.
Yep.
I know where he gives me his
awesome.
itinerary. He's in England now, right? He's in Dublin. So
okay.
No, I'm just kidding. But that's where he is. But yeah, Todd is a wonderful, wonderful person. All right.
Amen to that.
So, keep the questions coming. Yeah, nerd as hard as you want in chat. I'm very happy to see that. How did I know they were looking for a new setting in 2002? Correct? Was it WotC?
Correct.
Was it Paizo Hawk? Can you give us a little background on what happened at that point?
So what happened, as far as I know, keep in mind, I've never been an employee of Wizards of the Coast. I've always been a freelancer, engaging with things. So my understanding of the situation is that Wizards bought Dungeons and Dragons from TSR,
back in 97,
created
I think
third
it was.
edition.
Yeah.
So they created third edition. They inherited all the properties that TSR had, and were sort of based off Forgotten Realms, and just sort of wanted something new. Wanted something that was unique to them, that was also created in collaboration with the other departments, the novels, the potentially card games. Essentially part of it was coming into this saying, we know we are a company that makes books, that makes games, that makes computer, that does all of these things. Let's make something new, knowing all. They did what was called the fantasy setting search, and it wasn't exactly a contest, it was an open call. And the distinction between that is that they didn't have to pick a winner. You know, I mean, it was just saying anybody who wants to can submit to this, including people who worked at Wizards, and they're looking for something. And if they pick it, you know, they will go through all this stuff. But the point is, it wasn't American Idol. You know, it wasn't like they didn't have to pick a winner. There weren't any, you know, they weren't trying to get someone who had no experience. As I said, many people at Wizards submitted settings. But I think, in all honesty, you know, again, someone there would have to tell me, I think they only expected, you know, open calls were sort of common part of the business. And I think they expected to get like 300 or 400 entries.
Yeah.
And instead they got 12,000. And because everybody was like, okay. And so basically what you had to do was send them a one-page description of a Dungeons and Dragons world. And it was very sort of structured. You had to say, who are the heroes? Who are the villains? What kind of adventures do they have? What is magic like? And do all of that in a page. And as I said, they got 12,000 entries. And they picked 11 of those. And people then had to turn those entries into 10 pages. They picked 3 of those, bought the rights to them for $20,000. And then thus the 3 finalists had to write 100 pages, you know, make an actual proper story Bible. And then from that, they picked Eberron. And the rest is, as they say, history. And when we were going from 10 to 100, they actually brought the 3 finalists in and talked to us about what do we like about your world? What do we want to see? So at that point, we got some direction. And things did change a little from like my first one-page idea.
Yeah.
But that was the structure of the fantasy setting search, was starting with 1 page, pitching a world, and then going 1 page to 10 pages to 100 pages to the actual book. Once they picked it, then they brought me in, and basically I spent, you know, a couple weeks in Seattle working very closely with Bill Slavisek, Chris Perkins, James Wyatt, and that's when, you know, they first off called out what they liked about my original proposal and what they didn't. You know, a lot of things evolved from there. So Eberron, as it exists, is very much, you know, a collaborative process with input from a lot of different people. But it does come from that core idea that I pushed, you know, I pushed out.
Yeah. So what was this something you had you run your home games for decades, or you came up with this for this contest, so to speak?
That is correct.
Okay.
So it's definitely not like, you know, you compare it to Ed Greenwood in the Forgotten Realms, where that was his home game and he had tons of lore. This was the fantasy setting search. I had, for the previous 8 years, been working in the video game industry. And for the previous 3 years, you can see up on the screen, one of my old, I'd done that Crime and Punishment as freelance from Atlas
sitting
Games.
here on my bookshelf.
I've done a bunch of like little freelance work for Green Ronin, for Atlas.
Look at this, Keith.
But my day job, we are.
Oh, that's this is brilliant. This book's
So I worked in video games, and the game I'd been working on for 3 years was a pulp-themed MMO, sort of in the theme of Uncharted, Raiders of the Lost Ark, that kind of thing. And it had gotten canceled, and I had quit. But I'd been watching pulp serials and pulp things for 3 years. And so I just kind of thought, what if you took that flavor, that sort of over-the-top adventure, and so the pitch of Eberron, because one of the things you had to do on the thing was like give us the 2-sentence pitch, and the pitch was Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Lord of the Rings Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Maltese Falcon meet Lord of the Rings, a world where magic is and arcane science are part of everyday life. So that's the sort of 2 elements of Eberron. Is on the one hand, you've got those aspects of noir and pulp, over-the-top adventure, and also, especially for the time, breaking away from the clear sort of good-evil paradigm that, frankly, alignment and such brings in, and saying orcs aren't necessarily evil, you know, humans aren't necessarily, you know, elves aren't necessarily good. So on the one hand, you had that pulp and noir, And on the other hand, especially with third edition, arcane magic, wizards, magic items, it all acted very scientifically. They had very concrete rules for creating magic items, for creating spells, for a wizard teaching a spell to another wizard. And part of the point to me is, if it's so reliable and mechanical, if it's so scientific, why doesn't it evolve like a science in the world? Why aren't people harnessing it and using it? So that was the other, and Eberron wasn't something I'd run before, but I'd played with that particular concept before. I'd had a couple of campaigns where I just had, in one game, it was the elves, because they were so old and whatever, were just essentially a cyberpunk society, because their magic was just more advanced than everybody else. And so they just had corporations and, essentially arcane computers and things like that. And so that's sort of where Eberron comes from, is that combination over-the-top high energy pulp adventure, noir intrigue, and sort of stories don't always end well, shades of gray, set against the backdrop of, if we had had arcane magic in the Renaissance instead of the science we use, what would the world look like 400 years later?
Yeah.
Almost a little bits and pieces without the future tech of Shadowrun, right?
Right. Well, and the point of it is, Shadowrun and Arcanum were two things that were out there.
Right.
And one of the things I specifically called out in pitching it was, what distinguishes it from Shadowrun or Arcanum is that magic and technology are not in opposition. Magic is the technology. And it's just saying, what does a society look like if they are using magic to solve the problems we have solved mechanically? But certainly there's some overlap with Shadowrun, and part of it is, I'm a big fan of cyberpunk. I loved, and so you do have the element of the dragon marked houses are essentially fantasy megacorps. They have that sort of same role. They don't have to, it depends on the kind of game you like running, but they can certainly play that role of these economic entities that are becoming larger and more powerful than nations. And how does that impact the society?
It's awesome. It's really,
But the main,
it sounds, it really sounds collaborative. I mean, you started with the one page and went up. So a question from the audience was, what was something they didn't like in like the 10 page?
Sure. So first off, before I get to that directly, just adding to the sort of core point. So this is the thing, is that, as I said, little ideas here and there come from things I've run before, but the world I hadn't. And so in fact, when I pitched 7 ideas to the Fantasy Setting Search, because there was no limit. So I pitched 7 ideas. Eberron was the last one. And I only pitched it because I liked it. I just thought it was fun. I wrote it. You didn't have to do this, but I just did it. The opening of the one page, I just wrote a little story, and it was Mickey Redblade was sharpening his dagger when she walked in. She was 3 feet of trouble, the most beautiful halfling he'd ever seen. But he could see it in her eyes. She was, in danger. And, it was just sort of that juxtaposing of it. When they picked it and they said, we want 10 pages, I was like, really? Okay. Well, how do we make this? How does this actually work? So anyhow, going to the question of what's something they didn't like, a big thing they didn't like that I came back to is, in the original pitch, part of my thing was very much wanting a world that made sense to me. And that's sort of the point of magic, of saying, if we had these things, what would be the logical consequences? What would come from it? So there's a lot of different elements of D&D where I'm just like, well, if this existed, what would it do in the world? One of the things was, in D&D, by default, you've got the Sahuagin, you've got Lokatha, you've got merfolk, which is to say, a lot of intelligent species, which again, depending on edition, Sahuagin are much more intelligent and, sort of mentally advanced and magically advanced than your typical humans. And so part of it was, I had political maps of the oceans. Like, we had the oceans broken down into political territories that were basically just, they were nations, and if you're going to cross the ocean, it's like flying across the airspace of another nation. And so, like I say, the original maps I proposed actually have, I gave them 3 maps, and one was your standard map, and we appreciate this on it, Anna. One was just a standard map, sort of the kind of thing you'd see anywhere. One was a map that highlighted both the surface nations and the aquatic nations. And one was the aquatic map that just showed the land masses as pure black, because if you're merfolk, you don't care what's on land.
Yep.
And that then had a more detailed breakdown of the aquatic nations. And this was, if you're a merfolk, this is your map.
Huh.
Yeah.
And
Very
and
cool.
they just weren't interested in that, so that part got dropped from
Perfect.
the didn't get included in any significant way in the main setting, as opposed to I then very recently, in a book I made in 2021 called Exploring Eberron, I actually finally went ahead and put some of that in there. But that, as I said, was a piece that they were just like, aquatic adventures are too much trouble. We don't want to deal with this. Let's just not bother. But it was an example to me of saying, if you have these sentient, magically advanced species, they ought to have civilizations that are just as significant as the surface nations.
So that's a great point. Our Greyhawk community is developing a ton of underwater and oceanic content, like this Ocean's Bounty, which we showed off at GaryCon by Troy Allen and Cannibal Publishing. There's a lot of that going on now. So it's like, hey, if they're not going to do it, someone else is going to, and the community's doing it now. So that's a great point.
Right.
There's Troy. Yep. Gee, that sounds familiar. He's on chat now too. Yeah, I mean that's
awesome.
but so you have all that, so you have that like stored away somewhere, or did you do any guides
yes
for
and
it?
no.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the point, is this was all high level. As we said, this isn't a world I played in. So I had sketched out, these are the nations, these are the borders, and I still have those maps, and I love those maps. Although again, the geography of the world completely changed, once it to become what it is today. But that is where, with Exploring Eberron, I actually took one of the oceans and sort of developed its culture in more depth.
Okay.
With the others, all I ever had was like 4 pages of ideas. But that's the point. The rest of the world got developed; those didn't.
That's amazing. See, Troy, other people like water. I mean, yeah, Troy. So you're not out there. I know a lot of people were like, "Oh man, Greyhawk has no developed water masses," as in the same. So Keith, it's like great minds think alike. It's something that can be developed to this day in a lot of settings.
And it's the key point of, you don't have to do it.
Right.
The answer that was given is, it's too troublesome to get there. And my answer is, yeah, but if there's nations there, what are the consequences? Like, part of the point
Right.
in what I was saying was, it wasn't you have to go there, but if you're actually going to sail across the ocean, you need to actually basically get permits. You need to follow a flight plan
Hey,
and
Chris.
meet with a Suagan guide, because you're crossing through their territory. And it was just sort of recognizing that these are forces in the world.
So we're going to do a parallel here, because I don't want to keep Greg out of this discussion. So
Sure.
a year or two before that, you made a movie with your buddies, right? At college, Greg?
And
Yeah.
before we do this, I'm just going to quickly note,
please.
I'm going to run off for a moment
Yeah,
because
please.
my headphones are about to run out, and so
No
I'm going to go
problem.
grab my
No
other
problem,
headphones.
Keith.
Be right back.
No problem. So Greg, tell us a little background on the Blair Witch Project and how everything came together.
Yeah, Blair Witch started with actually with try to make this long story as reasonably short. I was really on the verge of quitting trying to be a filmmaker. I was very frustrated with how my career was going. I was just going to join but I was going to join the union and just work on other people's stuff and not worry about being a filmmaker so much. And then went to see 12 Monkeys.
Oh, wow. What a great movie.
Super inspired by that movie. Kind of made me feel like how Star Wars made me feel when I was a kid. I didn't join the union. I was working on a TV show in LA, and I'm like, I'm not going to join the union. I'm going to go back to Florida, where I went to school, University of Central Florida, and make a movie. And I had no idea what that was going to be. And within just a few weeks of being back, I was like meeting with some guys I went to film school with, and Dan Myrick, who was one of the co-directors of Blair Witch, pitched me the idea of what became Blair Witch. And at the time, there were like they knew they wanted to be researching this fictional being that they were calling the Blair Witch. They knew it was about kid filmmakers, young, college filmmakers going into the
Bust my
woods.
balls.
Way they knew about the stick figures hanging in the trees. We knew about the house at the end, but it was a very simple pitch. We're talking about pitches. Very simple pitch from Dan, but it like rose the hackles on the back of my neck, and like literally within minutes of hearing it, I'm like, I've never really produced anything except to the extent that you produce your own stuff in film school. But I'm like, because I knew Dan and Ed would be handling the writing and
Cool.
directing duties, which is what I normally did. And I'm like, then I'll just do whatever I can to be involved, and I'll produce it and I'll make it happen. And that's, and that's how it started. So, uh, really started with that moment. And then, like you guys were saying, like Keith was saying earlier about story world building being a part of, all sorts of storytelling is even true of Blair Witch.
Yeah.
Ed Sanchez and I, who we co-created the Emerald Anvil universe together. We've been business partners since film school so now going on 28 years, I guess. We both want to be filmmakers because of Star Wars. We're about the same age. I'm a little older than Ed, but I was 11 when Star Wars came out in '77. And I never thought of Star Wars as just a movie. I always thought of Star Wars as a story world, right? Because there were, action figures and games and all this other kind of stuff. And I didn't look at it as ancillary to the movie. I looked at it as part of the story world. So I think Star Wars really kind of got me started on the idea of stories not being singular expressions of a story, but rather an expression of a larger thing. And then Dungeons and Dragons came along. I started playing Dungeons and Dragons probably in like 7th grade, so a few years after Star Wars, a couple years after Star Wars, I guess.
So like 83, 84, that realm?
No, earlier than that. In
Oh.
7th, how old are you in 7th grade? You're 12, 13.
Yeah.
No, so it would have been like 78 or 79.
Oh, same time I played. Same exact time.
Yeah, same
about
here.
same
And
age,
we're
yeah.
1 year. I was 12
Yeah.
when I watched the Star Wars movie, so
Yeah.
I'm 1 year older than you. And I can't understand now how I survived between watching Star Wars and starting D&D that many years
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
started with Holmes Basic? Started with Holmes Basic box set?
I started with basic.
Yeah, with the dragon on the front and the wizard.
Yep,
yeah.
yep,
Okay, that's
yep,
Holmes. Yeah.
yep, which
Yeah.
Just-
and I remember looking at Dungeons and Dragons. I remember looking at that box. I have two very distinct memories related to wanting to become a filmmaker or becoming a storyteller. Is when I saw Star Wars, I know exactly the moment I decided to be a filmmaker. Is when Darth Vader walks through the door, the very beginning, Rebel Blockade Runner, the blown open door, and Darth Vader walks through. And I'm like, whatever just happened to me, the chemicals of my brain, I want to do that
Yep.
for people.
Nice.
And then I do remember looking at that Dungeons and Dragons box in a store, and
Yeah.
I don't know what it was about it. Maybe I read the back or something, but it felt like damn near magical.
Same here.
Yeah.
Go ahead, there,
And
Keith.
so, and I did play modules, some, but we very quickly
homebrew guy.
transitioned to being all homebrew.
Like,
So I just have to interject for a moment. Can you hear me okay, by the way? Because
Yeah.
We're
changed
good.
my
Yeah,
stuff.
you're good.
Yep,
Absolutely.
great.
So I just have to note that my reaction to Star Wars, as a person who also loved it, was I ended up getting, I still have them somewhere. I had a little Darth Vader lead miniature that someone had made.
Lead?
It was like an off-brand, well, pewter, off-brand, unlicensed, but it was a little Darth Vader and some stormtroopers, and I immediately made homebrewed rules for
wow.
Star Wars D&D.
Oh,
Nice.
And so my answer, I'm saying you saw it and said, I want to make a movie. I saw it and said, okay, I'm making that as a role-playing game. So this leads to where we are today.
I did ask this question on our previous talk show. Darth Vader appears in a Dragon magazine adventure. Does anyone? Yes.
Oh wow.
That is familiar, but I can't
Yes.
remember.
Wow.
It's
But
actually a halfling in a Darth Vader suit. Yeah. So.
I have to say, I think that making classes, I made classes for a couple Star Wars concepts. I think that was probably like the first piece of game design I ever actually did.
Wow.
Was trying to convert Star Wars to
Or a
D&D.
Star Wars game. Yeah.
Long before I ever actually
Hey, Von, welcome.
played D&D. I had the rule books when I was 7, and I didn't actually start playing until I was in 4th or 5th grade. But I just loved reading them.
It's amazing that that science D&D crossover, everyone still wanted to do it, and that's, you know, that's where you have Starship Warden, Metamorphosis Alpha, and then of course Expedition to Barrier Peaks, and I think that's where you got your love. It appears to go this Eberron direction. If you want to elaborate on that, Keith. What?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Barrier Peaks was amazing in a couple of different ways. I was very much, you mentioned being homebrew, Greg, and I was the same way, but I would definitely buy anything I could get my hands on and sort of mine it for ideas. So I, you know, all the Vault of the Drow, the Giants, you know, the adventures, even though I didn't run them, I ran them and took ideas. But Barrier Peaks, you first off had this, it was just a beautiful artifact because you had this whole art book with just amazing, with like 80 pieces of amazing art sort of thing. And then it was just this concept of, what if you go into your classic ruin, you know, you're going into your tomb, but what if it was a spaceship? What was a class spaceship?
Yeah.
And I played Gamma World, and I loved Gamma World as well. But this was this point of, but putting them together, having your character with the sword also get power armor, having, you know, how do you deal with it when you're a wizard and you're dealing with an android? And so part of it was I did just love that juxtaposition. And as time went on, I loved Shadowrun, I loved Arcanum, you know, I love all those things that blend, that sort of transcend the classic genres. And as I say, the difference with Eberron was saying, okay, but wait a second, what if it wasn't chocolate and peanut butter? What if it wasn't science mixed with magic? It's what if you just made your chocolate using peanut butter?
Right.
You know, what if magic was the science?
So unfortunately, with all the what happened with Jim Ward passing when we were at there the first weekend, right? And that was really sad.
Yeah.
We got Andrew Scott Perry and I sat down for like 2 hours and just were just talking and talking, and like we found out some things. Like you have those aha moments. Like we had one with when Jim Ward came on. We found out that Gary Gygax called him the Monty Hall DM for the first time ever back in the 70s.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and we were
That's
like,
amazing.
"Wow, that's amazing!" You know. But we found out. Andrew told me that it was the Starship Warden actually. Barrier Peaks was a landing pod for the Starship Warden. So that's how I'd never known that was, you know, what it was. So it was cool. You find out, and unfortunately, you have to find out those things in a little bit of a tragedy. But just the reminiscing of, it was always there. The tech part of D&D was always there. Now a lot of people don't like tech. Anna hates tech in her game, right?
Well, I don't like it in my D&D. I don't
Yeah.
like it in fantasy, but
Right.
I played Traveler and stuff. But for me, it was weird. I love to play sci-fi and stuff until I started flying and doing stuff like that for real. Then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
no, I like to do that for
Right.
real. But my fantasy in D&D, I love that because that's something you can't do for real. You can't fly your dragon or cast magic and stuff. But so for me, that became something that I'd more love to do in video game simulators and for real. But fantasy is something I love to do as a storytelling tabletop role playing game. So I narrowed my interest, so to speak, from other stuff. Yeah.
I will note that I could pull it out here if I think. I know in the original AD&D hardcover DM's guide, there was a section where they
Crossovers.
talked about crossovers, and they
Mhm.
talked about particularly,
Hill.
I remember Boot Hill.
Yes.
Yep.
And
Yep.
and again, I think part of it was I feel like they
Yeah.
talked about squad leader or something. It was like,
Yep.
what if you had, you know, a traditional D&D
Yeah.
party running into a squad, and
Yeah.
it's like, oh, and
Mhm.
now the wizard's going to be flying invisibly and cast sleep on them, and they'll fall off the road.
Yep.
And again, for me, on the one hand, as I said, when we go to Eberron, part of the point was to not have it be conflicting. But there
Mhm.
was definitely from the beginning, whether it was Barrier Peaks, whether it was that in D&D, that I did just like that idea of, but what happens when these two things that don't belong together run
Yep.
into each other?
That's awesome. So as we try and get to present time here, you both are on two separate paths. So Greg, you had a hit on your hands, and like we were talking about before we started, that sci-fi documentary that scared the crap out of me almost as much as the movie did. I was like, because
Yeah.
it was like I thought it was real the first time I
Yeah,
saw it.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
yeah, tell us a little bit about that because that was like genius.
Yeah, well, the original concept of so in addition to Star Wars being a huge influence, Ed and I were both, and Dan too, were all super fans when we were kids of. Do you remember the original In Search of that Leonard?
Leonard Nimoy, yeah,
So I loved that
yeah,
show when I was a kid, right?
Mhm.
Because it did that thing of blending, reality and fiction, or
And
reality
lore,
and
yeah,
something that was like supernatural, right?
yeah.
Like it made you believe it. So we grew up like we loved those old In Search of Us. We loved this movie called Legend of Boggy Creek.
Oh, Travis Crabtree.
Yeah, which was like a fake which was like presented like a documentary. It's like a Bigfoot movie presented like a
Yeah,
documentary.
absolutely.
That movie freaked me
Oh
out
my
when I was
gosh.
a kid.
Oh yeah, that was
Right?
So
scary.
I'm curious, Greg. I think of Blair
Wow.
Witch as sort of the first major found footage movie. Is that true, or are there other
Uh,
examples that are significant before it?
Well,
Hmm.
we didn't know about it, but when we made Blair Witch, when we shot Blair Witch, we found out about it while we were editing. But there's a movie from, I should know this, the late 70s, early 80s. I should know the year. It's Cannibal Holocaust.
Oh my gosh.
It's an Italian movie about a film crew. No, is it Italian? See, I don't really know it that well. See, I still don't know it that well.
Cool.
But it's about a film crew that goes into the Amazon, and bad cannibal things
Oh.
happen to thus Cannibal Holocaust. And you would really probably say that's a found footage
All right.
movie.
But I mean, still, I feel Blair Witch really sort of brought it into,
Yeah,
sort
yeah,
of
yeah,
when
Yeah.
people think of it, that's the first one people
yeah.
Yeah.
generally are
It
going to
was.
think
I
of.
mean,
So when you
it was.
invent, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, so when you came up with the idea, it was not you were like you thought of it as an original idea. You didn't have like, oh, someone else did, and we want to do a version of it, or
You weren't saying let's do a Cannibal
yeah,
Holocaust movie.
No, we were saying this is what I was getting to with the special that Jay's talking about, which was called Curse of the Blair Witch.
That's it. Yeah.
Uh,
That was awesome.
so the original concept for Blair Witch as a movie was it was going to be like a 2 hour long or an hour and a half long, a feature length episode of In Search of.
yeah,
It wasn't going to just be the footage of the filmmakers in the woods. It was going to be an analysis of it, right? You were going to have experts and breaking down
That's
the footage and
genius.
analyzing it, and you were going to kind of solve the mystery, right? Or
hmm
at least propose ideas for solving the mystery the way In
That's
Search of did. So we shot the footage that eventually became the movie in a weird way. It was like improv in the woods based on me having gone through survival school in the army, as like an 8-day improv session almost in the woods. We always thought that footage of the filmmakers in the woods was just going to be, like half of the movie. So while we were editing that just to get the story together, we were filming all this other stuff that was going to go into what was supposed to be the movie. So interview with a real
documentaries.
witch, an
Yeah.
interview with the parents, an interview the sheriff, an interview an expert on getting lost in the woods, and interview an expert about this or that or the other, right? Make fake footage of like the original guy that they reference in the movie Rustin Parr, the serial killer who kills the kids in the house that they end up in. We shot footage of him in jail, like newsreel footage of him in jail and getting interviewed and all this kind of stuff. And we tried cutting that into the movie, and it just didn't work. So at some point, and I believe the first person who suggested it was Kevin Fox, who was our executive producer, was like, the movie should just be the footage of the kids in the woods. And that took us, honestly, that took us a while to wrap our heads around, but eventually we realized that was right, and that's what we edited and really finished that right before we submitted it to Sundance. So then once we sold the film and Artisan, we started
Cool.
down the marketing thing. We told Artisan, well, we have all this stuff that we've already shot, we could do something with that. And they came up with the idea of putting it on Sci-Fi Channel as a real documentary, right? There was no disclaimers that it wasn't real. So we just cut all the stuff that we had already shot. We shot some new interviews to kind of tie everything together in a 30-minute segment. But yeah, we just cut together all the stuff that we had already shot for the movie, and that's how we were able to turn it around so quickly, because we sold the movie in January, and then it was out in July, and
Cool.
and Curse of the Blair Witch came out right before the movie came out. So we had a pretty short window. The only way that happened really was we had all that stuff sitting there waiting, basically.
Yeah. That was genius. I mean, that was just like, wow. Because I remember watching that, and I was like, I had to watch it multiple times. Like, oh my God, it scared the crap out of me.
Yeah, it worked. It worked.
Yeah. Very cool. That's excellent. So we're talking in the 90s and 2000s, and now we're all on a journey here. So Keith, you've done Eberron Publishing for 3rd, 4th, and 5th now,
Yes.
right?
So it came out in 2004, and then for when it came out was when what usually is called 3.5 came out,
Right.
the sort of advanced version of 3rd edition. And then 4th edition came out, and it was converted there, and then finally in 2020 it was converted for 5th edition. I also, the other thing is that there's a lot of novels for Eberron. I actually have written 6 Eberron novels myself during 3rd and 4th edition, and it's about 33 in total, I think.
Wow.
So that was another wacky thing.
That's great. That's one thing that we always found besides the Gordon novels, Greyhawk's missing. Right, Anna?
Yeah.
Missing a lot of
Yeah.
great there's novel content. We just
Well,
didn't
yeah,
get it.
it's kind of flaky at best, so to speak. And
Flaky. Yeah.
also, yeah, and also the problem with Gary, he published a lot of the module or his novels after he left TSR, so they are now a conflicted version of a forked version of Greyhawk, of the
Right,
Greyhawk
right.
setting. So the products don't match, I guess, deliberately in a lot of sense. So
Well,
yeah.
I have to say, of course, you run into that same problem with the actual Wizards-related books.
Oh, yeah,
I mean,
even
it's
within,
not
but
like all the novels have, or even editions have perfect continuity with one another.
no, but it gets even worse when it's almost on purpose
Sure,
toward each
sure.
other. So yeah, but it's impossible with something that is done over decades, and especially when it's done, is supposed to make a profit, and you kind of
Yeah.
there's certain elements we realize makes much more we know our business better now, and the audience have changed and all of that, and editions of the game changed and stuff like that. So yeah.
So
No.
Keith, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, go on.
There was a
No, you
question
first.
from the audience. Was Eberron the most successful 3.5 era setting, or is it always Forgotten Realms?
I honestly do not know. I mean,
Okay.
again, I didn't
Yeah.
work for Wizards, so I couldn't tell you. I
Okay.
mean, Forgotten Realms was the sort of original mainstay for 3rd edition, and
Well, to be honest,
continued
the
to be
Greyhawk,
so.
Well, that was because
Greyhawk
Eric
was
Mana.
Greyhawk
Yes,
was
that's
the
very true.
original default setting, but
It's true.
but
It's the
yeah,
gods and things like that.
yeah.
It
But
was
the
the default
interesting thing
setting.
was
Right.
that didn't lead to a whole bunch of Greyhawk products, because
No.
it was the Living Greyhawk campaign that took care of that part.
Right,
So,
right. There wasn't a lot of it
so
was all
the
magazine.
Greyhawk was the default setting in the player's handbook, but then
yeah.
as published products, Forgotten Realms was key, which to me it was very weird, because you ran this Living Greyhawk campaign and then you didn't support it with a whole bunch of products, which to me was a
There's
mystery.
a lot of weird things about that. And
Yeah.
I have to say, I got to play in Living Greyhawk game in 2004. I went to Australia and got to play in one of the epics
Yeah.
there, and it was
Oh,
fantastic.
nice.
And I loved the whole concept of Living
Mhm.
Greyhawk,
Last
Yeah.
Greyhawk
with actually
publication.
having it sort of geographically
Mhm.
matched to places. I thought that was just a really cool idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously I can't explain. So as the point is, Eberron initially was very successful for sure, and they used it for D&D Online.
Exactly. That's my experience of the end of
Right.
Eberron, but we need to get to that later.
My guess to the question that's out there, my guess is it probably wasn't more successful than the Forgotten Realms books, or they would have kept going with Eberron more strongly in fourth
Yeah.
edition. So I'm going to guess that Forgotten Realms was still the more popular, setting, but it certainly did well enough. Like I said, they did 33 novels, they did D&D online. So it was successful.
Yeah.
But I think Forgotten Realms probably, that's the reason they've stuck with Forgotten Realms is that it's been the reliable mainstay.
Yeah. And also the concept of game settings is something that started to vanish, and now we live in a non-setting specific. Now it's
Well,
all D&D, and settings have been out of fashion, so to
Except
speak.
you
But
got yours.
and I think that's economics.
oh, exactly.
Bingo.
That would silo the audience then.
I think the issue was with Wizards in third edition. What you ended up was, for a period, they were steadily producing Forgotten Realms content and Eberron content. And I think someone basically said, we've created this scenario where our audience is only buying half of our stuff because they're liking one setting and not the other. If we just kind of dissolved the settings, and what you have for the last two editions is they put out one book, there's one Eberron book, or or the the one Dragonlance book, whatever, and it's got enough other stuff in it that they're hoping you'll buy it even if you're never going to run an Eberron campaign because you want rules for Warforged and Artificers. And it's back to that. That is what the OGL theoretically gave us, is that for a company like Wizards or Hasbro, they are solely interested in what will make them the most money. For one of us, we can make something because we love it, and that's what's great about the community being able to make content is, we get to focus on the things we're not doing, we're not going to get rich doing it, sadly. But it means that we're making the things that we love.
Yeah, and that's just like what Ed says. I love it, and that's why I'm going to keep on doing it. So absolutely. And Ed's words of wisdom at Gary Con got a lot of us on the right path. As he said, he said this multiple times. He says, you don't know how long you're going to be around. You need to get your stuff out now, because if you don't, no one else is going to do it. So, and he's like, enjoy that process. And go ahead. Yes.
And I'll just say, for me, I mean, part of the point of it, and we're sort of jumping around in time here again.
It's okay.
But Wizards owns Eberron. And for the longest period, I couldn't make Eberron stuff. The only person who could release Eberron stuff was Wizards. Now, because of the DMs Guild, I have been able, over the last couple of years, to make new Eberron books of my own. And that's why you can now see what's on the bottom of the ocean. And that's now why you can get more about the planes.
It's great to hear.
And further, there are hundreds of other people making Eberron content that's great, that are covering topics I've never had the time or interest in covering. So I'm just really glad, it is the great thing about this is, whether it's homebrew or whether it's an existing setting, it is the fact that we can be creative, we can make our own stories, and that's great.
All right, Greg. So you're super successful in Blair Witch, and then you stick in the horror genre in the 2000s, 2010s, and or do you bounce around a little bit?
Yeah, by and large, Ed and I stayed in the horror realm. Somewhat choice. We love horror, but also because at a certain point, we would send our agent something non-horror, and they would be like, "What? What are you doing? Like send us something that we can sell." So I guess pigeonholed, I guess, is a word for it, but happily so. I mean, look, I feel fortunate that I still get to make stuff creatively at all, horror or not. But always messed around with like wanting to build like big giant story worlds for sure, and kept trying to do that on various things. We did a show for Fox like right after Blair Witch called Freaky Links.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
That ended up being like a mess for a variety of reasons. But our original idea was kind of like a horror story world that had very D&D like, factions of werewolves and factions of vampires. And
oh man,
we actually, speaking of ocean things, we had like factions of, like a lycanthrope that was like in the ocean. So we had these giant ideas that never came to fruition. Ed and I created the story world setting for an ABC show called The Quest. I don't know if you guys saw that, where that was like an elimination reality show set in a fantasy setting.
A good friend of mine, who you all know, Elisa Teague.
Yeah.
I believe we played Glim with
Yes,
her.
absolutely.
I think her son was at least one of the competitors in the quest and might have actually been the winner.
There was
I
a
don't
second
remember.
quest. They used Our World. We weren't involved with the second one they did. The first one was for adults.
Okay.
They did another one that was on Disney Channel or Disney Plus or whatever that had kids in it. So they used Our World, but Ed and I weren't involved in that.
Got it.
So definitely applying and creating the story world for the quest was maybe one of the easiest gigs I've ever had, because it was just straight up Dungeons and Dragons. I literally drew the map and then like named the nations. It just felt like Dungeons and Dragons. And and that's definitely kind of the creative process, story world building, story world process that we applied to Emerald Anvil as well, which is how Keith and I connected. And actually pitching Jen and Keith on Emerald Anvil was like very early in the process, and one of the highlights of the whole thing for me, because Jen and Keith got it in a way that like almost nobody else had understood it before. Like, as I'm explaining it to Jen and Keith, they're like, you can tell they're already thinking ahead of where I am because they know where it's going. So it's been really, really fun working with Jen and Keith on Emerald Anvil, because they're thinking about it as at least as expansively as I am in terms of like story world building. Like, what Keith has pulled off with Eberron, with all the ancillary products and the novels and all that kind of stuff. That's absolutely what we want to do with Emerald Anvil.
Yeah, I'm showing you a little bit of the website now.
Yeah,
So you got Battle for Hada here, Journey to Hada. Am I saying that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And then Glim. So
And then
that's
Glim.
what we're gonna. Yeah, Black Velvet Fairies, Uncover the Past, Strange Paintings, and a familiarity to strangers.
Which
Still.
is out.
Oh, is it?
Out.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, Black Velvet Fairies is a podcast.
Ah.
You can listen to it now.
Apple. On that, is it weekly?
Yep, weekly we have 13 episodes, and I think the 6th episode just dropped. So it's every Tuesday.
Okay.
But we're doing it with PRX, which has been really cool. But yeah, it's on every platform. So if you listen to podcasts, you can find it on whatever platform you're on.
Excellent. Now I'm stuck. You see, okay, we're good. We're good. Just working through So let me ask you another question. Going back to the horror genre. So when and I don't know if it's horror genre, but I think it is. When like those movies in the early 2000s, like Constantine came out, like did that, I thought they were like brilliant, and Rob Zombie stuff, any inspiration or connections with that genre, or was it more like we got our own thing going at that point?
With Emerald Anvil, or
with you and your creative process, like because I know like Constantine is actually DC Comics, right?
Yeah,
so
comic,
so but I just thought that the movie was brilliant. I how they fit it all in one story, that and it's tough to do that in an hour 50 minutes.
Which is why it's great that television is an option for so many properties now, right? We can tell the stories properly. You don't have to jam it all in.
Okay.
So what's the connection? I'm sorry. What's the connection?
I was just curious, as as we saw, there was a genre in those early 2000s where a lot of really great, not the hardcore horror, but the horror aspect, demonic and supernatural. The TV series came out at that time, and we saw a lot of really
Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Buffy and Angel were my favorites. The only thing was Josh Whedon, and you could see where Josh Whedon ripped off D&D for Buffy, and Firefly was Traveler. It was the Traveler game. It just refixed, and then that was a shame. But Fox ruined that. They could have had a great TV series with Firefly, but then he fixed it with at least a good movie. So it was your mentioning Fox. Thank you, Stronghold. So I'm sorry, I babbled a little bit there. My apologies. I babble a lot.
I mean, horror is always viable. That's the thing about horror. There is always some successful something going on in horror. It kind of ebbs and flows
Yeah.
somewhat, but horror is always viable. At least as a commercial product. I hate to call it product, but
Right.
when you do it professionally, sometimes you have to look at it that way. Horror is always viable in one manner, shape, or form or another, and horror is viable at a low budget level in a way that basically no other genre is. I mean, you can't make a low budget fantasy movie or
That's true. You
it's
need props and
Yeah.
yeah, it's very
effects and all
difficult.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, very difficult to make a low budget science fiction movie. It is possible, and it clearly has been done. But horror is kind of the low budget king or queen, emperor, whatever.
Now,
Yeah.
Being able to deliver something in a genre space for a low budget that could be successful, whether that's Blair Witch or lots of other lower budget horror films that have been successful.
throwing some random thoughts out there, of course, I'll say
Please.
that from the very beginning it came out, I of course loved Call of Cthulhu, and
Yeah.
horror is role playing, and I actually want to say 8 years ago now, so a while ago, but that would put it 2016 sounds around right. I made a role playing game called Phoenix Dawn Command. And Phoenix, part of the point of that was to be a fantasy sort of action horror game. Like basically the way I describe it is it's sort of a fantasy, sort of if you took Rome, the TV series, and
what a great
put it
series.
That was a good
together.
one.
Oh,
So
yeah.
basically fantasy but low magic world, so sort of a gritty low magic world. And if you took Rome and you mashed it up with Aliens, the second Alien movie,
Okay.
because the point is that's a horror movie, but it's a high action, sort
Yeah.
of almost a war movie at the
Mhm.
same time as
Best
being a
of the
horror
Alien
movie.
movies, in my opinion. Yeah.
Same here, but it's different. It's obviously doing a different thing, but my favorite. And so Phoenix was designed very much to do that, and part of what defines Phoenix is death is how the characters level up. That basically
That's a cool
you
concept.
can
Yeah.
die and come back. The other thing we use to describe it is Gandalf on the bridge. And the point of it is, it's very much Gandalf in the sense that you can die, and when you do, you come back, but you don't come back right away, and you don't come back where you died. So the point is that within a mission, if you all die, if there's a TPK, you're going to fail the mission. It's not over. You're going to have to live with the consequences of that failure. The other catch is that you can die and come back stronger, but you only come back 7 times. And so death is on the table. But what's funny about it is it means when you start off and you don't have a lot of power, you can be really reckless. But the more power you get, the more you have to actually start using it carefully, because when you die the 7th time, that is it. You're done. And so there were a lot of interesting aspects to that. And part of the point of it is that damage in D&D is a hard platform for horror, because the dice are so random that it's hard to build suspense when it all comes down to the roll of the die. And death isn't really something, it's hard to make it work as part of the context. Whereas in Phoenix, we use cards instead of dice. So you had more immediate control. You knew what you had in your hand to work with. It's as if you knew what you were going to roll ahead of time, but you might have a bad hand. And also, failures on the table. We can have a TPK and the story will go on, but we could fail this mission. It's basically saying we drop you in a village, there's a zombie outbreak, you have 2 hours to contain it. As long as you do, it doesn't matter how many of you die doing it. But if you all die, by the time you come back, we've lost the whole region. It's just going to be too late. And so it lets failure and consequence be present in a way that I'm not, Tomb of Horrors is something, but I mean, basically, if I just say, oh, there's an adventure and you're all going to die, like that's not compelling. That doesn't actually make it scary. Whereas Phoenix was an experiment of saying, because failure is possible, because sort of the odds may be against you. It shifted it
Mhm.
up, and I was pretty happy with it. It's not
Yeah.
something we've continued with, but it was sort of a way to try and explore, again, capturing the mood of something like Aliens, which I loved.
Yeah. That's a great idea. I did in my campaign. I I shocked my players. So when they died, they had to play on as souls, and they had to avoid getting eaten
So
and dragged down to the abyss
Nice.
and stuff like
Nice.
that. And so I
Oh,
made
cool.
rules, and it was all mental, so to speak. So
Yeah,
so
I love it.
because they couldn't do physical things, so they had to kind of make saving throws and then try to use the charisma to scare off things. And the first thing was that every evil thing was out for, because they were like beacons in the dark.
Yeah.
So they had to kind of hide and try to avoid and then yell and scream and realize that the living couldn't see them. So they had to kind of mentally kind of send thoughts and stuff like that, and then get search for it. So it was
Oh, that's
like
cool.
being marooned in this world when it goes under, and it was on the borderline of Iusians, so to speak. So the Iusians were always looking for souls, and so when they gated in a demon, then it was like really troublesome.
man, it's a
And
big meanie.
I
yeah,
loved
yeah,
I loved there was a monster in a game called Element Masters. There was just a small, tiny fantasy indie RPG back
yeah,
30 years ago. But it had a couple just ideas I really liked. And they these creatures called shadow wolves, and they were basically shadows. They were wolves, sort of essentially what we would now say they're wolves in the Shadowfell. So in the physical world, you only see them as shadows,
yeah,
but when they focus on someone, they can pull them into that world.
mm-hmm, yeah,
And the point of what was sort of compelling about them is that they would sneak around, but they grab one member of the party. And so the point is the rest of you can all see. And meanwhile, Greg is fighting this pack of wolves, and the rest of us can all see them as shadows, but there's no
mm-hmm,
way for us to affect them. And it was this interesting way to say, well, now it's just on Greg. There's nothing we can do to help. Is he going to survive or not?
yeah.
And it was an
Well,
interesting, just little way to play with things.
and I said the obvious way to help is to kill yourself and get killed, and then you're on the other side, and then you can
Oh,
do it. So
I like
so
the way
so
you think, is all I'm
yeah,
saying.
so that's the one of the, yeah. So I'm making, these was kind of a test for my rules. So I'm going to make more rules and more detailed rules, and how go about it, so to speak. And it's also different if you're a soul-based creature or a spirit-based
Oh,
creature,
nice. I
so to
like it.
speak. Because yeah, the elves and fae and others, they are spirit-based. They don't have a soul, so they're just spirit ones. And they are, yeah. So it functions differently. So everybody's out for souls, because, or almost everybody, because they are the currency of the lower planes, so to speak. So if you sell your soul, there will be someone waiting when you're dead, so to speak, and you don't get any death saves, because
No, I love
you're,
it.
you're selling them away, so to speak. That's the taking them away. So I'm tweaking I make a house ruled 5e version of 5e for my own games that way. So I
I
will
love it.
publish the rules for it as a just a give away the rules. I'm not they're not going to be solid enough or be appeal for wide enough, so to speak, I think. So it's more like my experiment of making my version of the rules, so to speak. So yeah,
I love it. That's a very fun idea.
yeah. So
And
so
it
we
comes
take
up with some good concepts that are scary as hell when you're playing. Like I'm gonna brag, Tower of Gygax. Anna had her zombie goats in that. Ugh.
Yeah, well, yeah, there was some. I tried to play it, and I loved it. Yeah, I'm looking into how D&D physics my way, so to speak, and then try to anchor the
Right.
rules in D&D physics. Meaning, for me, it's very important that the world makes sense, and the rule makes sense on its own premises. Meaning, things work the way they are. Meaning, dragons hoard gold for a reason. So then I needed to figure
Yes.
out a reason, so to speak. So
And
I work around. So okay, so these are the stories that we are familiar with. Then I realized, okay, that means that the world needs to function. There is a logical reason. They're not all crazy, so to speak. If dragons hoard treasure, they're doing it for a reason, and demons corrupt, and so on and so forth. So I try to make D&D physics support the stories and the magic system and stuff, and then I
and
try to implement that into the rules.
and that is exactly the same principle behind Eberron. Is
Mm-hmm.
exactly that.
Yep.
Is
Yep.
saying that's the point of
Yep.
how would, if we had the
Mm-hmm.
magic we have in D&D, how
Yep.
would we use it to solve
Yep.
problems of society?
Mm-hmm.
One of
Yep.
my favorite little details in Eberron, this is an obscure thing, although I've talked about
Oh.
it a lot,
Oh,
so more
please.
people are
Yeah.
aware of it, but In Eberron, there's a nation that is formed of creatures traditionally thought of as monsters: Medusas, harpies, ogres, trolls, gargoyles, that over the last 10 years have sort of come together and formed this nation in the west of Corvair called Droam. And one of the ideas about this is that they've been brought together by this trio of hags. And the idea is, well, why haven't they done this before? Why hasn't this happened? And part of it is because a lot of these species are carnivorous, and they simply haven't been able to support. You can't support a city of 10,000 carnivores.
Yep.
And that the daughters, the reason they've been able to make this work is because they provide people with food, and they have a substance called grist, which is like a sausage that they provide to whoever sort of goes along with their thing. And what is grist? Well, the answer is it's troll meat. And that the principle is they've got troll
It's the
farms.
fantasy version of Soylent Green.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, and I was like, oh my
And
God.
it's green.
Yep.
And the idea there is twofold, which is first to say, if I can chop a troll's arm off and it grows right back, well, then, why aren't we eating them? And then the second answer is to say, well, then why haven't people been doing this for thousands of years? And the answer there is basically saying, oh, it's incredibly carcinogenic. It's incredibly dangerous to actually eat.
Yeah, and trolls are kind of nasty to farm, so to speak.
And
Yeah.
the idea is that the
Yeah.
daughters have basically come up with an alchemical solution that essentially makes troll meat that's safe to eat. But it is still that point of saying, let's take something in D&D, a troll who you can cut their arm off and it will grow back, and then say, well, if that actually existed, we can help feed a nation. So yes, they have Soylent Troll.
Yep. Oh, that's awesome. That's one of the I haven't. It's one funny they make it mention it because the zombie goats was one of IUCN inventions that came out of dire need, so to speak. That the low level clerics, they realized that IUs wanted the taxes from them, so to speak, and the low level clerics that were out in the villages and stuff, they had two problems. One, IUs demanded taxes and money for his to his empire, and secondly, he wanted control of the citizens, meaning people couldn't allow to flee. So they realized that goats are everywhere, and if we turn them undead, they can go around and hoard and make sure that they can kill people that wander off, so to speak. And secondly, we can take most of the meat off and sell them, and then turn them undead. So that was a kind of a dire need to fulfill this kind of both policing and getting meat over and send off, so to speak. So that was the reason for the zombie goats. And trolls. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
I was going to say trolls was more of a high level thing. I realized that trolls are really, really good because in my version of the rules, he's evil. He doesn't have access to normal healing. So he wanted to get the magic properties out of trolls and realized that, and he wanted to we can feed them, feed others using troll, whatever. So he made like a troll breeding program, and he tried to, first he wanted to have like a nastier troll that could be a brutish, like the frontline soldier, so to speak. He wanted the frontline brutes so he can win the war. That became a black troll, an abyssal troll that came out of it that was super nasty. But he also realized that the clerics, the poor clerics that had to do the hardy work, they realized trolls are incredibly hard to farm because they are dumb enough so you can try, but they are smart enough that once they get desperate, they will overman you. They will gnaw off their own limbs and then attack
why
you with
not?
whatever.
It'll grow back.
Exactly. I mean, they are nasty ones. So they had when they were trying, they had some rebellious young trolls that went, and I stabbed them up, and they just went haywire and killed everything, and so on. But they got an abyssal troll out of it. That was one of the few. But I have other troll types that I want to come out of that program that I haven't really studied up yet. So yeah.
Now, the great thing with trolls is you could just catapult them in, and it doesn't matter how much damage they take.
So in Eberron, one of the major nations, Karrnath, part of the point there is that the different nations have pursued different things. Undair is more focused on arcane magic, Thrain is more driven by divine magic, and Karrnath, during the major last war, they were dealing with famine, and they basically use industrialized necromancy. And part of it is, again, very definitely, your classic skeleton and zombie are not very smart or useful, but they're great for farming. you know, and so it's
Yep.
that same principle of
Mhm.
it's farming machinery is,
Yep.
yeah, why not have a bunch of
Mhm.
skeletons out there, you know, plowing the
Yep.
land.
Yeah.
It,
So yeah, no, and that's so we're very much simpatico here. You know, that
Mhm.
was a lot of the point of Eberron was
yeah.
again, what if you
And
took the things and said,
yeah.
what are the logical consequences of these?
Mhm.
What are ways you could use this in a
Yeah.
practical manner?
Mhm.
It's very much what you said before. That's the point to me. If a dragon hoards, I want to know why they hoard.
Yep.
Okay.
You know, there's got to be a good reason for it.
Mhm.
And there's so many interesting things you can go with that way of it's a completely different thing I was working on, but we were working on a thing where you're playing a dungeon, you know, crawl from the monster perspective. And part of my idea there was that it's just a nerd thing and that they're collecting stuff the way we collect stuff. And that the
Mhm.
reason the monster has like the healing potion that it didn't drink, like you're like, well, when they just drink the potion, it's they're like, oh my God, that is a mint in flask, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yep. Yep.
I agree.
2019,
Mhm.
you know,
High
open
intelligence,
potion.
all
You
these
just
quirks should
drank
come.
it, you
Yep. Yep.
know. But
Mhm.
anyhow,
It's like, why
Yep.
does a predator collect
Mhm.
skulls,
Yeah.
trophies? You
But
know?
I love
Yeah.
meaning my experience with Eberron is Dungeons and Dragons Online, which was
Mhm.
really cool. And I played it from early beta and for several years afterwards, and it was fun. It was my main D&D fix for a few years when I didn't run that many games myself, so to speak. But it was fun, and to me it was interesting how things were, meaning the Warforged, for example, there
right.
was like sci-fi elements and stuff, but you really made them fit in. They still had the fantasy feel to them and
And
everything, and that was really cool. It was not like a crossover where you had robots and laser guns or whatever and so
barrier
on. It was
peaks.
still exactly, but it was it was made in a fantasy-esque version of it, which I really liked. And
And
normally I'm hyper allergic to stuff
right.
like that, but all of a sudden the Warforged and stuff, they felt like they belonged there,
Okay.
which was so
And
cool.
And that's exactly where I was going with first off talking about barrier peaks and second talking about
Yeah,
Shadowrun. That was the point is we weren't trying to put robots into D&D. We were trying to say in
yeah,
D&D
hmm
what fills this point. And the point is
yep,
golems have always been
Yeah.
in
True. True.
D&D.
exactly. That,
Why not
yeah,
going to
and
be
And
and
what
sentient?
mhm.
Okay.
Warforged are sentient
Yeah,
mass-produced golems.
exactly. And then all of a sudden it makes sense because you don't start from the sci-fi end, you start from the fantasy end and then work your way into,
And
yeah. So I love
and it
that part.
lets you explore some of the
Hmm.
same stories
Yep.
we explore with Data, with, you know,
Hmm.
androids,
Yep.
with things like that. But it's certainly Blade Runner was, you know, an inspiration for
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
but
Replicants.
still
Yeah.
in an
Yeah.
entirely
Hmm.
logical within the world magical way.
Yeah, meaning you can make a one-dot magic missiles and then make it slightly more advanced, and you have a laser gun, so to speak.
Yeah.
But make it
Well,
into fantasy, make it D&D-esque and stuff like that. Don't
this
call it a laser gun and make it look like this and pew pew and yeah. Then
this is actually a
yeah,
big it's funny again, sort of coming back to this, the things you like
yeah,
and same here is one of my points is you can put anything you want to Eberron, but you know, into D&D and whatever. I have for a long time resisted putting in firearms. People want to
yeah,
put in firearms,
yeah.
and the reason I resist it is because Eberron is a place where
Magic.
magic has been evolved in place of science.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
so what I'm saying is I don't just want to have firearms in there for no reason. I want to say, what did they have instead of firearms?
Yeah.
What is the answer
That
they have
makes
developed
sense.
using their science?
Hmm.
And one of the things I came up with recently that I was just telling people, and of course what I've always said is, but if you want firearms, put firearms in. I'm not going to come and, you know,
Yeah.
knock your
But
door
on
down.
the other hand, if you don't
But
have real world chemistry, you have elemental chemistry and stuff.
right.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
do all kinds of
Hmm.
things that solve the same
And
problem.
could go boom in
And
a way. Yeah.
And one of the things I did in actually my most recent book was talked about the fact that just because people are using crossbows in Eberron, don't assume that they're medieval crossbows. And part of the point is if you actually look at the stats in D&D, it's like, because
Crossbows
they're
can be
not.
nasty in
They're
real world too. Yeah.
the fact that I can fire and reload a crossbow in 6 seconds When
Yeah,
like you
it's
go over all the
That's yeah.
stats, you're like, this isn't a medieval crossbow. And so this is part of what I said is you just got to change your brain around and think, actually,
Mhm.
that
it's
crossbow is
true.
like a cool, badass. And I like came up with a whole bunch of like, this is how I would envision the crossbows of Eberron that are actually made
Big class.
using, sort of the magical principles of the world. They
Yeah.
just are still crossbows. Anyhow,
And
that's a whole
No,
nother
hey,
can
this
of
is
and make
worms.
hey,
a returning a spear, for instance,
Yeah.
or something like that. It becomes
Yep.
nastier than almost anything. Yeah.
Certainly with fifth edition, one of the things I like about fifth edition, and it started with fourth, was the introduction of cantrips, of spells that can be used over and over. Because now what we have in Eberron is we talk about wand slingers, and the idea that basically you get people who just basically get the magic initiate feat. They can just cast a couple cantrips, but that now becomes a viable. You use a bow, you use a crossbow, I use a wand. Because that's my I can throw flame bolt and I can throw
wand
shield,
mages. Yeah,
Mhm.
and that's the point. I don't have to be a whole wizard.
right. You can
I've
have
just,
limited
I've
spell
just got
access.
magic
Yeah,
initiated. Yeah.
yeah. No, it's makes total sense.
I'm
I
wondering.
see them. I see a lot of those as a militia captains, lieutenants. Right when they're going, they have low level. My altimeter, they have low level mage ability, but they have wands. Wands of sleep, wands of magic missile.
Well,
Yeah.
and I hope you don't mind if I jump on this one more moment, Greg.
Please.
This is part of the point of Eberron was saying that what you had that because Eberron was trying to capture that pulp flavor, part of that was to say the heroes should feel like heroes.
Oh yeah.
And part of what that meant is that player character classes are significant. That even as a low level player character, the fact that you have 3 levels of fighter, you're a badass. And part of that was saying that most characters in the world, most of the population doesn't use player character classes.
Right.
Yeah.
Third edition had introduced the idea of like warriors and aristocrats and these things that didn't use the regular, you weren't just a fighter. And Eberron went a little further and introduced the idea of the mage right. And the point of the mage right is they're the industrial magic user. And that basically, if you have a locksmith in Eberron, the point is they can cast knock and they can cast arcane lock. And they can do those as rituals, so they can do them a bunch of
Yep.
times as long as they have the material components to do them and the time. But that's all they could do.
Right.
The locksmith doesn't cast magic missile.
Yep.
And so is that idea of saying you can have people who have a very narrow scope of what it is possible for them to do, who use magic, but just as a job.
Yep.
And that a wizard is like, the sort of Tesla or Edison, like, they're the sort of brilliant prodigy. The fact that I can just pick up a book and read it for a night and know how to do fireball tomorrow, like that's because I'm cool. Whereas, the plumber doesn't
Mhm.
suddenly invent a new system of plumbing,
Yep.
tomorrow.
Yeah, that's I like a lot of that idea. So what I did was I took classes out of my house rules. I simply say that I
Sure.
make it skill based in that sense. So it's still D&D mechanics when it comes to hit things, armor class, hit points and stuff. And that way I just said that, well, you can have some character that you can learn one spell or one cantrip or something like that. And so there might, yeah. Typical example, a locksmith or something. He knows how to manipulate locks, maybe even mechanic or magically. And a
Sure.
plumber probably knows a little trick or two in that book too. A good plumber that he can unclog things, so to speak. So yeah.
The main thing is when you take the cantrip prestidigitation,
Yeah.
you suddenly have a whole bunch of careers because
Mhm.
prestidigitation can heat, it can cool, it can
Yep.
clean,
Mhm.
it can chill, you know what I mean? And suddenly you
Productivity
have
must be amazing.
vacuum.
No technology needed if you have
Yeah.
that widespread in a society. Meaning, come on, that's
Basically,
better than us.
Yeah, just in that principle, you have microwaves, refrigerators, vacuum
Mhm.
cleaner, sort
Yep.
of all done by a spell.
Yep.
But I also feel, Greg, you had something to say a while back
Oh yes.
that we
Sorry,
cut
we
you
Well,
off.
we want to
interrupted
make
you.
sure that we have plenty of time for your Glim because we want to promote the hell out of it here, right? So
Oh yeah,
so
I mean Jay's you've actually played it, right? You're one of the
oh yeah, yes, I got some pictures for it too. But so I I could sit here all night and listen to this nerding out too. I
Me
could
too.
do it.
It's
I
awesome.
could do
Yeah.
it. This is great.
Well, and that's the
That's what's
point, right? That's the point.
that's the
Is
wonders
the
of these
nerd.
talk shows
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
we get on a roll and you just talk about just whatever comes to your mind, and I really appreciate it. Yeah, so Garner's on too in chat, Keith.
Yeah. Now we
So,
need to know way more about the
absolutely.
board game. Yeah.
How did how the merger come, Greg?
Well,
How-
I was going to say that Emerald Apple actually connects directly to like my thought process with creating Hada and the Emerald Apple story world is actually like directly connected. When I first read about Eberron and knew I was going to go pitch Emerald Anvil to Keith, I'm like, he's going to think that I ripped him off because there's a lot of similarities. Because what I started with Emerald Anvil was my kid when they were 6 years old, which was 12 years ago now, was really into the Fae and the fairies and Tinkerbell and stuff. So for me, it started with how could I make a fantasy setting centered around fairies that I liked, right? As an adult, fan of fantasy stuff. And I wanted to start with something tangible, like what would explain, like you were talking about with the dragons hoarding gold, like why would that be? Who are these fairies and why do they appear to us as these little beings, right?
Okay.
And I just wanted to just be like traditional British Isles. They come from the land of Elfheim, or they're from the land of the Fae or whatever. That it wasn't just simply explained by magic. So for me, I wanted to create another world, like a physical place that they have these portals built into their planet that they took them thousands of years to figure out how to use, but they can project images of themselves to Earth to communicate with humans. So they have this power on Hada called Glim, which they make their wings, they make these blades. Basically, they do things to us that feel like magic, but to them is not. It's just how they can interact with this energy that they have.
Manipulation of energy.
Manipulation of energy.
Okay.
So the reason that humans perceive the Hadin, the reason that the humans perceive Hadin as little fairies is that they're projecting themselves like a holographic projection across light years and interacting with humans in that way. And then if they like you, they can bring you back to Hada. So the big conflict on Hada, but over thousands of years, millions of humans live on this fairy planet. And
what I love about this is just the vision that Luke Skywalker thought that maybe Princess Leia was only 6 inches tall,
right,
because that's how we actually seen her.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was the thing. We thought, oh, that's the way they look. But one of the main conflict really in the universe is the Hadin, which is what they call themselves. They don't call themselves fairies. They naturally can process this energy called Glim, which is what the game is named after. They can make wings come out of their backs so they can fly. They can make blades come out of their hands to fight. There are other ones called the Walking, which don't fly, and they have like wizard-like powers where they manipulate the Glim for that. Humans learn over centuries to make devices that can harness Glim. And once the fairies figured out that humans were figuring this out, they became terrified of humans.
Humans are not indigenous to the world.
Humans are not humans are indigenous to Earth, and the Hadin, at least as far as we know, are indigenous to Hada.
And they got there through the portals, or it's on
humans did.
Humans did. Okay, just want to make sure.
Hada,
Okay.
Yeah, all humans that are on Hada have been brought there by the portals.
Got it.
So you've got that sort of changeling thing going on.
Okay.
And you or just the idea of the typical Fae thing of you go into the fairy circle and you go to the land of the fairies and you never come back, or you come back 40 years later, and that's the kind of the same premise. But the idea of it being like a somewhat tangible kind of sci-fi explanation for why the Hadin function differently than we do, at least on Hada. So there's definitely kind of some, and with the tech stuff, there's a lot of crossover with Eberron, that again I didn't really know until I was going to go pitch Keith on this idea, and fortunately he was accepting of the similarities.
No, absolutely. I mean, to me, it's exactly the same way that when Anna, you were talking about your stuff. To me, I'm like, oh yeah, I love that idea. I love it. It's there's only so many ideas out there. People are going to come up with the same things, and it's
Oh yeah,
more
you get.
interesting to me to
Mhm.
say, oh, but what's your take on it?
Yeah,
Where are
and
you
you
going with it?
steal, you get inspired or steal, however you say,
Exactly.
when you hear these things. Oh, I take it this way, and I take an idea from here, and I twist it a little bit, and then I put it into my puzzle, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I love
And
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
Anyhow,
No, so we always knew that we wanted, we always knew that we wanted it to be a multi-platform thing. The idea is that, nobody's going to give me and Ed $200 million to make a giant epic fantasy movie about fairies, but we could get a little angel investment and put together some lower budget stuff, right? A novel's
yeah,
relatively cheap. A podcast, even a narrative podcast with sound effects and actors and all that stuff is relatively cheap. A board game is relatively cheap,
yeah,
compared to making a show or a movie.
yeah,
So we always knew that we wanted a board game to be a part of it, or some sort of game. And when I found Jen and Keith, like, lived basically like almost in my neighborhood in
Oh,
Portland,
cool.
and met them and pitched them, I was like, so excited that they were even here. And when they signed on, I was just thrilled because I knew that Keith and Jen were going to take the world of Emerald Amble and do something super cool with it in the gaming space. So
yeah,
they took the world and ran with it. And Glim as a game is like, the elements of the world are mine as the person who co-created the world with Ed, but the game is all Jen and Keith, and they just took it and ran with it and came up with, I think, a brilliant game mechanic system. Really fun, really simple, really pretty unique feeling game mechanic. And then Jen actually came up with the idea of, let's make the game an artifact from the fairy world, right? As if, because humans are going back and forth for centuries, Jen came up with the idea of, well, what if there was a game on Hada that humans had seen the fairies playing, and over the centuries have kind of brought different versions of it back to Earth. And so Jen and Keith turned what is a gambling game in on Hada, which you can read about in Journey to
Journey to
Hada.
Hada.
This is my editor's proof, so it's like got the little band on it. But the game is actually in or mentioned in Journey to Hada. And then Jen and Keith came up with the idea of, over the centuries, humans turned this kind of simple gambling game on Hada into almost like a let's teach you about Hada game, right? So it's kind of archetypal storytelling from Hada that teaches you about the world and about the powers. And it's all, it's called Glim. So it's all kind of centered around the idea of players trying to accumulate this mysterious power that the Hadin called Glim.
So when we were talking during the talk show Wednesday night before Gary kind of actually started, I think Keith, you and I discussed that it had a feel of Cosmic Encounter back in the day. It had the two different versions of that, which was cool, and that's why I think I got drawn right to it because that was like predates Magic the Gathering, predates a lot of those other games, and I was like, wow, this would have been I immediately was drawn to the simplicity, but the complexity at the same time, if that makes sense.
And that's certainly for us sort of the key things. Were wanting something that was very easily accessible. A previous game that Jen and I made is called Illimat, and that's a game that draws on a number of classic card games like Scopa and Casino and such. And part of what we like about it is it's very easy for people to pick up, because if you played any sort of Hearts, Gin, any of those games, you sort of understand some of the basic concepts. And that's sort of the same direction we went with Glim, of just thinking about classic sort of dice games and things that people resonate with. And so the basic point of Glim is you have this board that you can see there,
Yep.
so this cloth board that you
Yep.
spread out, and it has 6 spaces for cards, what are called resources, and you lay out 6 cards around the board. Every card has a Glim value. So first of all, by getting cards, the Glim, you win the game by having the most Glim at the end of the game. So that's the most basic thing, is you want the cards that have the highest value. At the same time, every card also has an ability. And once you've claimed a card, you can use that ability in subsequent rounds. And so the point is, again, as you said, very, it's much simpler than a game like Magic, but the point is still you start with sort of a clean slate. But each round of play, you have more tools to play with, and each subsequent round becomes more complex in its strategy and actually goes on for longer because you get more influence to work with. And so that's what's fun about it is you start off with this sort of clean slate, and each round, now what do I do with what I've acquired? How does this affect what I'm doing? So the basic gist of it is you have 4 dominions, which represent powerful factions within Hada: Aga, Hogosha, Pydos, and
There
the
you go.
Walking. Yeah, those 4 factions. So you have these 4 factions, and you start by picking a faction and picking one of 2 champions of that dominion. And that provides you with a basic set of moves that you use during play. On your turn, you pick one of your 2 moves, and that will basically allow you to roll a certain number of dice. You roll dice, you look at the board, and the board basically has 6 cards. Each card is tied to a symbol. When you roll the dice, you basically see which symbols you've rolled. You pick one of those, and you can put influence on the matching card. And so there is an aspect of luck because it's die-based. You've got a deal. You can have the best plans in the world, but if the dice don't go your way, that's going to be an issue. But then there's a lot of strategy about which abilities to use. So if you look here at the board, you can see basically each of those 6 cards in front of it has a symbol, and that's the symbol you roll to match to that space. Now the catch is that the dice you'll see are 8-sided dice. And part of that was because we wanted to have this feel like a game that isn't from our world. And one of the sort of catches to that was saying, we always use 6-sided dice. Like 6-sided dice are our classic thing. Well, what if we're from a world where it's base 8? What if it just that, again, this is their common die is the 8-sided die. It also means the dice are 2 different colors. The odds on the dice are different to get the different symbols. I won't get into the specifics, but the point is if you're trying to roll a particular thing, you're going to want to pick your dice to associate with that. Meanwhile, I mentioned that each character has different tactics. And the point of that is those determine how many dice you play, but also they'll add different things. Certain symbols might be wild for you. So just looking at 2 very simple ones, Pydos, the sort of bad guys, one of their distinguishing moves is they just roll 6 dice. They roll all the dice, and it just gives them a lot of options, but it's just a very blunt hammer move. The Walking, one of the others, only rolls 4 dice, but the knowledge symbol, the book, is wild for them. So if they get that, they can go anywhere. It's a little more finesse than
I played
Pydos.
I played the red every time because I just wanted to be.
Meanwhile, like another thing, so basically what I didn't say is you have 6 influence tokens, and you roll depending on how many dice match the symbol. That determines how much influence you can place on the thing. When you are out of influence, whoever's gotten the most influence on cards gets to claim the cards, and that's how you get them. Then you start a new round, you deal out new cards and go. You have different things like the Walking. One of their signature moves is they roll 6 dice, they move influence to a card, but then they can take one of their opponent's pieces and put it on with them. And that is a thing that is tricky because you have to do it in such a way that you come out ahead, but it lets you interfere with your opponent's strategies. Greg and I and Jem were just playing the other day, and I had a perfect move where I didn't actually like it, didn't help me, but I got to move one of mine and pull one of Jen's over in a way that it sort of amplified a conflict between the 2 of them that they didn't really want to have, but I got to do it. So again, the basic point is it's very simple. You talked about Cosmic Encounter before, and it's very simple in its concept. You roll dice, you match them to symbols, you pick one of those and put influence there. But then there's a lot of, around that very core simple mechanic, depending which characters you're playing, which abilities you've gained, there's a lot of little things you can do that actually add, a very fun degree of strategy to it.
If I recall, I really in the first round of this game, I really screwed over Alyssa Teague.
Oh, she was so pissed because it was a whole thing where Ed,
Yeah.
in the corner there,
Yeah.
Ed had played all his pieces early,
Yeah.
and he was sort of, out of play because he used up all his influence, and he was losing. And basically, you
took one
and
off.
Todd
Yeah.
just ended up through a bunch of things, moving pieces around, doing things like Elisa was totally sort of gonna come out ahead, and then because of the way you ended up between the two of you using your abilities and such, it ended up with Ed getting the card that she was gonna
Right.
get. And that was,
Yeah.
and,
that
and
was-
he didn't even have anything to do with it,
Yeah, so true.
and so yeah, Elisa was not happy.
Yeah. Is it a game where you build alliances against each
can.
other, or is that
So-
kind of
so this is the
built-in
thing,
mechanics? Yeah.
It's not, long term, it's a 2 to 4 player game, and one of you is
Mhm.
going to win. So
Okay.
there's no tied victory.
Yeah.
However, that was a perfect example of that last game where the point was, they wanted, Elisa was ahead,
Yeah.
and
You
they
can
wanted
gang
to
up on
weaken
if someone is
Elisa, so
ahead.
they gained.
Yeah.
You can
I
gang
tried
up
to
on
do it
them.
subtly, but it
Exactly.
didn't work.
Yeah. Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of that. There's a lot of ability to work together to
Mhm.
sort of unseat someone who gets in too powerful a position.
Yeah. So there's some
But at
group
the-
dynamics you can play with a
Right.
little bit. Yeah. Mhm.
Absolutely.
Cool.
And but at the end of the day, only one of you is going to win. But
Mhm.
it's exactly that, and it's the same way as I said, the game where I sort of moved a piece around to create a conflict between Greg and Jen. That was a 4-player game and a 3-player
Yeah.
game. If it had been a 4-player game, it still would have been very interesting to work things around.
But it's a game that works up to 4 players and
Yes, 2 to 4.
so like 2 to 4. Okay, 2, 3 to 4. Yeah.
Technically speaking, the only limitation on 4 is that we only have 4 dominions with it, but it is still the case that more than 4, it would be a long time between turns. I think 4
Okay,
is a
yeah,
good top
yeah.
number.
Four
Yeah.
works real well. I think the flow
Mhm.
is good. As you learn the game you get each round goes faster because you know what you're
Right.
doing.
Yeah.
You start
Yeah.
developing tactics.
Yeah.
And you start looking out for who is your rival at that point. Like who's
Right.
got who's got as much Glim as you. Looking around,
Yeah.
oh my God, he's got a large point Glim. He's going to try and get. You got to figure. There's ways of screwing people. Really.
Yeah.
And that's part of the game. That's part of the fun.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah. You got sabotage too there. Garner in your game too. So, but myself and Ed will also, and we'll have Ed on in a couple weeks. Ed will say the same thing. He loved the strategy of it, and that was simplicity with complexity and strategy. And the game's not going for 5 hours. That's another thing.
No.
And that's a good thing is that some games just go too long. I mean, everyone's played Monopoly. It's just games run too long, and it's just 2 hours is good. 2 hours is
Yeah,
good.
and Keith actually came up. We were doing a little test yesterday because we're going to do a live stream on Tuesday to show people how to play the game.
Yeah, so you can definitely see us play on Tuesday
What channel?
at 5 or 6, I forget. YouTube Live for Together Studios.
Right.
At 5.
At 5, yeah.
Pacific, yeah. But Keith actually came up with a great idea of how we can make an even shorter version if you want, where we're going to come up with a system where you can skip the first round and go directly to the second round and have like a preloaded set of cards that you're playing with in the second round. So
Right,
I think it would be really cool because you'll have an option of like if you want to play a super short game, you could probably play a game in half an hour. If you want to play a longer game, you could stretch it out and make it last much longer if you wanted to.
The basic point is by default, we suggest you play 3 rounds of play.
Yeah.
But you don't have to. The longer you play, the more complicated it gets, the more simple. And the main point is if you just play, the first round is always the simplest because you don't have any resources. And so that means it's less strategically complex. And what we're going to be trying on the Tuesday is sort of starting okay, but let's have the short but advanced game, which is everybody starts with a set of with 2 resources each. So it's shorter but deeper strategy right away. You have things you're able to use for deeper tactics.
There's our Kickstarter.
Yeah, so
Yes.
please click on the area. It says save for me, but click on that so that you get the announcement when the Kickstarter goes live. See right here, this. It
Yep.
says saved for me. This is what you want to click on. See, notify me on launch. Boom. Click that.
Yep, we're gonna be going on Tuesday.
Awesome.
And very excited about it. I mean, again, it is a game that I just have fun every time I play, and part of it is just that point of, because different resources come out different times, different people respond to things in different ways. It's just always fun to see. I think of roguelike games when you think of video games, and part of the point is you can do the same thing over and over, but seeing how the pieces click together and what combinations you get gives you a whole different experience. And that's how this works. I love seeing combinations that haven't come up before, and things like that moment with you and Ed. That are just, again,
Yeah.
just this is how this fell, but it always has new things happening.
And we play tested it with like, what Keith is play testing it at GaryCon with like, some of the best, board game RPG players on the planet. And then we've also play tested it with people who barely play board games at all and have had a really good response from all different
Right.
levels
Okay.
of player.
Right, just because the
That's
core
fun.
mechanic is fairly simple,
Yeah.
and that's sort of our point, is you can get into it fairly easily, but it then draws you into more complex strategy as you go.
All right, so let me ask this question for the audience. Tier wise, what's going to be to get this? What's going to be the tier pledge, if I may ask? What you see right here.
$30 for the base game.
$30
Yep.
for this right here. That's
Yep.
doable.
Yep.
Oh,
And
that's
as you can
great.
see, it's a cloth board. It is persona cards, is a deck of resource cards, which are beautiful. Shout out to our artist, Ren Lindros. Just has done amazing artwork for this.
it looks cool. Yep.
And so, yeah, like Illimat, it's a relatively compact game.
Yeah, really
which
cool
I like.
stuff.
But yeah, so $30 is the base.
What about upgrades? Like, what's some of the really cool fluff we can get here? Like, is there a collector's edition? Is there?
Yeah, we're gonna do what we call a relic edition. So this is the idea that Jen and Keith came up with, that this is a relic, an artifact from the other world. So we're gonna have actually I have the. So the idea is that this game was around.
Let me bring you on the bigger screen. Give me one sec here.
Yeah.
My cat, meanwhile, is being a menace over here.
Okay.
So we made a version as if this had been around since the early 1910s, right?
Yeah,
So it's like an in-game prop. That's awesome.
Yes.
So this is the version that humans were playing like in the 1920s.
That looks so Art Deco 1920s. That is like, wow. Yep.
Yeah. Adi Slepek, our graphic designer, did the graphics and just did an amazing job. The video, which you can't see, which is on
not yet, but Tuesday.
Exactly, a couple of days. Yep.
I mean, you could go look at the Emerald Anvil YouTube right now has it up. The Glim video was up. It kind of tells the story, the fictional backstory of the in-world story of the game. But so we'll have an artifact edition, which will be everything in the base game plus the old cover, plus a like a special mat, plus metal tokens. And
then
I
like that.
Goals, wow. Yes, and one of the stretch goals will be base game, and then the things that we've freed up with the stretch goals for the artifact edition will be available as a add-on if you just want to get the metal tokens. Or
cool.
And then we're doing the highest level that we're doing, which we're only doing 4 of these, and this is very exclusive. It's $2,500 a piece because it's got a persona of your very own, and you will get to make your own persona card, which is one of the playable characters. That would be only for you, custom art for you, custom story for you. Probably not custom powers because there's only so many powers that we have, but a custom character for you, custom art for you that would be your persona card forever. And if we sold a couple of those, we'd be very happy.
I imagine you will.
That would be cool. And,
again,
the artist is so it will look exactly
is fantastic.
Yeah, the same artist is doing it. It would look exactly like one of the cards, and it would be, completely unique to you from any Dominion that you want. It doesn't have to be one of the Dominions from the game, because there's 4
There's-
dominions in the game.
There's 36
Yeah,
total.
36 dominions on Hada.
Oh, okay.
And this comes to the point where if the game is tremendously successful, then we can
Add-ons.
expand and
Yeah.
explore
expand.
more of
That's
the other
good. You have that
dominions.
built into the base
Right.
idea, so to speak, that you already have expansion ideas. That's great.
Well, and it's also like
Yeah.
it's kind of what you were saying earlier, Anna, about like the stuff with Greyhawk that ended up being conflicting because one person's writing one kind of story and one person's writing another. And this is one thing that Keith got right away, is like one of the things that we're trying to do is like hopefully in success, where we have multiple novels and multiple podcasts and multiple board games and multiple other iterations of the story that we're telling, we want to make it all canon and connected from the very beginning, and never having a situation like Greyhawk where you've got conflicting stories, or Star Wars where you've got expanded universe that you eventually
Right.
Yeah.
you eventually just abandon all these
Mhm.
all
One
these
of the-
amazing
track of
ideas
it
that
all,
you said are just not
Yep.
just those never really existed.
One of the things I have. Oh, go on.
No, but
I-
that's one of the exciting things as a as a geek, is like, oh
Mhm.
man, if we can make all this stuff stay connected, that would be that would be super fun from the game, like game crossover, because there's crossovers. So we're telling 4 stories right now, and they're standalone, but they're all interconnected. The novel crosses with the board game, the novel crosses with the podcast crosses with the board game. There's all these interconnected stories that if you read them all or participate in all of them, you'll get the connection, but you don't necessarily have to know all of them to understand the story.
So I will say, one of the things that was really interesting and fun, is challenging from the design perspective for Jen and I, is that point of the game mechanics are fairly simple in this, and basically how to capture the flavor of the world. We have these 4 factions, and I'm just very happy with the degree to which it works of capturing the flavor of Pydos as the sort of brutal, aggressive force. Hogo Shah is the more harmonious, diplomatic force. The Walking are sort of mysterious and have powers the others don't understand. And as I say, from the play experience, you've played it, so certainly you can speak to the point of the different dominions really do have sort of a unique flavor that does sort of fit that. Like Pydos does feel more sort of brutal, and the Walking are definitely more, sort of messing around with people.
So another World Tabletop asked, what is each of yours favorite dominion? It could be one outside the board game.
Oh, I'll let
Wow.
Greg go first.
Man, there's actually of the 36 dominions, there's one called Oxtend, and they're basically like they're like evil mad scientist types, where they
Nice.
do really weird things with Glim. And supposedly the legend is that their leaders are like Glim vampires who have prolonged their lives by sucking the Glim out of other fairies. And I kind of like them because they're our most horror setting, right? Like I love the idea of like kind of like Tomb of Horrors or whatever, which legit like scared me when I was a kid. Like I was scared to play Tomb of Horrors.
Everyone was scared.
Yeah,
of
you
Two
should.
Horrors.
Yeah.
I don't want to go in there. So I
No.
love that. Like maybe in success someday, there's like some evil like horror story that we're telling in the Emerald Anvil universe that has to do with these Glim
Cool.
vampire, whatever.
For me, it's tough. I stick to the core 4 there, and for me, it's tough. Of the Walking, I feel, are just the most sort of subtle jerks. Like they have a lot of ability to sort of screw with other people. I feel overall, I actually have to go with Hogo Shah, in part thematically. They're the good guys. They're the people who want to work with humans and work together. And strategically, one of the Hogo Shah characters has an ability called Winds of War that lets them move a placed piece of influence to a new location.
Yeah, that screwed me over a
And-
couple times.
Right, and basically it's the counter to the walking. The walking can force you to play a piece where you
Yeah.
don't want to go. And then Hogo Shah has the ability to say, well, actually, I'm going to move my piece to a new place. And both of those are very subtle and have a lot of manipulation. But Hogo Shah doesn't quite as often make your opponents hate you. Whereas Greg can attest from last week, the walking definitely does.
Nice.
Visions of
Especially when
Strife.
Keith
So
is-
I'll
especially when
I'll
Keith
go
is playing
Hogo
it.
Shah.
Yeah,
Excellent.
Keith playing the walking is a bad combo. That's not what you,
Yes.
not what you want.
I mean, I love it, but also everyone's going to hate me by the end of the
yeah,
game.
yeah, for sure.
I
So
think it was Garner who was especially if you don't know if he's still in chat, but I think
he's
it
here.
was Garner who was playing the walking and was extremely got everybody to hate him by the time we were done. But
yeah, I like this force. I like the force. You know.
yeah, and that's Pydos for sure.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the point of it's like D&D. It's like do you prefer to play the fighter or would you like to play the wizard?
I'll ask
You
that.
know, like what's your sort of play style and complexity?
So DM Chris asked, will there be a signed tier for
Ooh.
Kickstarter? Now
Wow.
there is. There you go.
I mean, there should
well,
be.
now-
It's true, I don't know if we have one there, but
There you
there's no
go.
reason we win. It's easy enough for us to do.
We are doing a couple of Blair Witchy things just because, I got to take advantage of the one thing that people are going to know me for.
Mhm.
So we do have some levels that are all the Glim stuff, plus we've got like 10 signed of the theatrical posters from me and Ed and Mike, who was one of the original filmmakers as well.
Original theatrical posters?
Original theatrical posters signed.
Whoa.
But then we have one level that we only have one of, and that is, and I actually, well, I don't know where it is. But we have a signed poster from Sundance because we had a poster that we made for Sundance that is a super rare in and of itself. But I have one that's like signed by everybody, every filmmaker, every cast member has signed it. So it's probably, I guess, one of the most rare, Blair Witch
So,
things that there is.
I'll
And
say.
we're doing one
What-
of those.
What we're saying is that we have a tier where you can get a poster, and we're also throwing in a $30 game.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
While you're there. But-
Holy jeez.
but bonus for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, we also are working on a tier where you actually go to Hada, but we're having trouble making that
Yeah,
one work. We're
yeah.
trying to figure it out,
Well,
Get-
there are methods nowadays.
Get
yeah.
those portals up and running, right? So
Yeah.
wow.
Mhm.
And so the reason I had Keith and Greg on is that when I play something and I like it, I want to share it with all of you out there. We got over 100 people on now live. So I hope that you sign up for it. And when I guess it's Tuesday, the emails will go out and sign up for the Kickstarter. $30, not a big deal to get the game and enjoy it, because I will do just like I do once in a blue moon. I even get live stream board games. I live stream Catan. We'll live stream another one of these. We'll be playing in person with my friends, so we will do it once we get it. So just note that
Awesome.
that's definitely. We had a blast that night.
It was, yeah.
I forget what night it was. Was it like Sunday or no, Monday night? I think it was some weird night that there was nothing going on, and we were sitting there talking. And Todd and I,
Your best friend.
my good friend Todd and I are drinking Wisconsin old fashions. And like I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want to get plastered on the Monday night. And then I think you came in and said, hey, I want to play this game. I'm like, I can stream it. I got nothing going on right now. I'll go get my equipment and we'll just sit there and we'll have fun and play the game and stream it. That's what we did. That was the second night. The first night we played with Garner, you, me, and Todd, all four played.
Right.
And the second night,
And then it was
Ed and Alyssa, Lisa and Todd and me played, and that's where that's where
and
this one came
that
up.
got brutal by the end for sure.
It did. And Ed had to leave, and then he won anyway. So
Yeah.
So and we played this. But that was good to see the brutality of the game and to see the fun. It was great, and that's why I want to recommend it. And I'm not that I'm anything beyond who I am, but I'm highly recommending it. I know Ed is too, who played it as well. So. What other questions do we have from the audience? I had a question I did not understand a ways back. Let me see if I can find it. It was about, oh my gosh. If you asked that question about Artificers, please re-ask it again.
I love a question about artificers.
Yeah, please. Hey, John. There was another question out there about, and I'll scroll back and try and find it. Any other questions for Gregg or Keith regarding the game, or anything else you want to ask? As we got a couple minutes here, so let me know. And I'm going to scroll, see how far I can scroll back and try and find this question. So, as we're waiting here, in summation, are you guys excited about this Tuesday?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, very excited about it. You know, the podcast is going well. People seem to be really responding to the podcast.
Great.
The Kickstarter starts on Tuesday. The novel drops on May 21st. And you know, I'm very nervous about that because it's my first novel. Keith's actually read it. Keith's one of the few people that's read it.
There you go.
So yeah, it's
And I'm just excited to see this
Thank
all
you,
come
Akshay.
out into the world because again, I really enjoy it all, you know, and I want to I think other people are going to have a lot of fun with it.
Found the question as he re-asked. The optional rule says, "Can you use trapped fairies as a means to create artificer items?"
Sure, why not?
There you go.
So one of the things I love about 5th edition with artificers is they call out that artificers use tools as their arcane
you.
focuses. And what I say about that is stop and think about what tools does your artificer use and what does that say about the form of magic they're using. So if you're using cartographer's tools, you're basically a sigilist, you're, you know, a scroll specialist. If you're using woodcarver's tools, you make wands. If you are using cooking tools, you're a magical baking alchemist, you know. So certainly there's no reason you couldn't use trapped fairies as a concept. I also talk about people who just are artificers who use fey magic, who is that whole idea of you make things that shouldn't work at all. Like I just make a marionette out of wood and it just comes to life because, you know, again, that's Pinocchio right there. That there's artificers by default are scientists, but there's no reason you can't play an artificer whose form of science sort of defies typical, you know, standard logic.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's not, Garner. It's not for any of Keith's original Ebron manuscripts tonight. No. That's
Oh, sorry,
he's
folks.
joking. Do you have all three? The 1 page, 10 page, 100 page still?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I have those original maps that are what the world originally looked like.
First winner. This is in reprint, of course. All right. Ebron campaign setting. Second winner. We'll do some Greyhawk books. You get your choice. If you already have these, you know, I got Patrick, KH Gamer's crazy. All the stuff he sends me.
Gaining, yeah.
Mark Lands, World of Gale. Got plenty of stuff. And if you already have the Ebron one, we'll get you something else in the second winter. We'll get that too. So, all right. I think we had that was it on questions there. So, I know we're coming on in 2 hours. I don't want to keep you guys beyond that, and it's really appreciate you both coming on. So, what would you like to say in closing, or anything else you want to shout out? So, Gregg, why don't you start us off here?
I mean, you know, especially for this show, you know, specifically, I would say, you know, really just shout out to Dungeons and Dragons and all the people who play it and the community and the energy that I've always felt comes from Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Which is definitely what is motivating me to try to create something and collaborate, right? That's been the fun thing, like collaborating with Jen and Keith on the game and the people on the podcast is like this idea of collaborative storytelling. And we really want to try to create something that lets people get in and dig into the world and take ownership of the world. Like I felt about Dungeons and Dragons when I was a kid. I felt like it was my world. And I would just love for that to be part of the Emerald Anvil experience for that. So I think, you know, talking about this with Dungeons and Dragons geeks is like super exciting for me. So
awesome. Thank you.
I said this to Keith when I first played it. I've been playing D&D for 44 years. No, 46. My Grail campaign's 44. I need to change up now and then.
Yeah.
I do. I need something. And that's why we did a Champions game yesterday morning live stream. We're gonna do another BattleTech game next Saturday morning because I need to change up because D&D and Greyhawk is wonderful. It's my love, but I need a little bit of flavor. You know what I mean? I need a little salsa here and there. And so a board game, and that's where we play Catan. We were very competitive with that amongst friends. I think this game's going to fit right into that genre of getting my other friends who aren't D&D players involved in the backstabbing and you know, of it. I think they'll really like it. So it'll cross over outside of, I think, the regular D&D people. So,
Yeah, cool.
Keith, what would you like to say in closing here? Tell us a little bit about your big project with Ed and Alyssa and Luke
yeah,
too.
so I'm doing all
Please.
kinds of things. So yeah, what that is about is I've haven't done a lot of live streaming in the past, but I've been doing some live play. Well, I say live streaming, live play. I'm in a group where it's me, Ed, Elisa Teague, Ed Greenwood, Elisa Teague, Luke Gygax, Tommy Gofton. It's called Legacy of Worlds, and basically it all started off. It's just this wacky idea of what if we, as people who created worlds, played characters from our worlds going on an adventure. So it's Ed Greenwood playing Elminster, Luke Gygax playing Melf, me playing Merrick Sakanath, the sort of artificer from Eberron, Tommy Gofton playing his character, Loholt Linvander, who's sort of the key character of his world of Amaria. And then Elisa is in the current game playing a character from Ravenloft, Elise, which gets very confusing because Elise and Elisa. And so the Legacy of Worlds is very much a sort of what if, because people who are Eberron fans might say, I thought Eberron was cut off from the other multiverse. And we're like, yeah, but what if it wasn't? You know, it's very much a sort of what if these four, these 5 characters from these different worlds ended up running around the multiverse trying to collect the deck of many things. And it's just a lot of fun. And coming back to what we were talking before, it's very much the chocolate and your peanut butter. I'm an artificer from Eberron in Athos, with an elf from Greyhawk. So that's been a lot of fun, and that's on 6 Sides of Gaming. It comes out every Tuesday. Doing Glim with Greg, that we're releasing on Kickstarter on Tuesday, this Tuesday. Then I also continue to do Eberron stuff on my Patreon, which is just Keith Baker at Patreon, and run a monthly Eberron game that anybody has a shot at playing at if they want to, as well as writing articles and such. And then my company is Together Studios, TWO Together. And that's where you can find not only Glim once it's out, but also Illimat and the Adventure Zone, Bureau of Balance, Cool, and the other games that we've made. And I'm Hellcow Keith on most social media platforms.
Yes, and I figured that out on Twitter. And when you followed me the other day, I was like, "It's not working, Keith Baker." I'm like, "Oh, no wonder, Hellcow Keith." I was like, "Ah,
Yep.
Yeah." So very, very cool, excellent. And I want to thank you both for coming on.
Yeah,
Really,
thanks
Yeah,
for having us.
definitely.
it's been a wonderful,
was awesome.
wonderful discussion. So Anna, you and I will forego our
Oh,
normal
yeah,
long
we
shout-outs.
Wednesday. There's
Yeah.
stuff coming Wednesday. So
I'm
yeah.
just going to do the big events quickly here. All right,
Okay.
these are all the
Yeah.
Saturday events coming up in May that I have banners for. Next Saturday morning, we're going to do our second BattleTech scenario in the Invasion of Corey. It's called the First or Last Patrol, I guess, depending on how they do. So it could be their last one. That's Saturday morning, May 4th, 9 a.m. Most of the players who played in the one 2 weeks ago are going to be back for it. It's my son's birthday is on the 3rd, and I said, hey Shane, what do you want to do Saturday? You want to go out? And I was like, no, let's play the BattleTech game again. I'm like, okay. I kept the day off for his birthday, but he wants to play, so that's what we're doing.
That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's in that game. This is all live stream. The Saturday after that, we go back to the group Nuclear Meat, and we got Little Bird, Coco, Minister of the Muse, Hex, Korg the Mighty, all in. Death in the Lort Mills. Well, that doesn't sound foreboding or anything. So that's a real fun group. That's Saturday morning, 9 a.m., and then the big one's the 18th. From Gary Con, look at this group. This is the wedding event that happened at Gary Con, where 2 characters in the Slav Squad betrothed their love for each other, and Eric Mona's character Venerian Ford is like the priest of Rauschaz. I'll marry you, of course. So I took Ed's group, 2 drink minimum, and the Slavs, and we got a crossover event. So Ed Greenwood, Eric Mona, Darling Creepshow, Myriad, Bones, Eric Mengi, Tony Winslow Brill, all in this 6 p.m. on the 18th. What could go wrong? So yeah, absolutely. Let's do the giveaways real quick. Then we'll rate in probably Darling, who's on as well. So all right, exclamation point drawing, and we'll get it out. First winner will receive this, unless you already have it. Okay. Second winner will get their choice of 1 or 2 Greyhawk, 2 modules or 1 setting book. As you know, the pile is almost 6 feet high now.
Oh, wow.
I mean, Patrick just keeps on sending me stuff, so and reprints. All right, here we go. Let's do this real quick. Last call, exclamation point drawing. We'll do this and we'll get everyone out of here. And gentlemen, I wish you all the best of luck. I will be pledging.
Thank you.
So of course,
Thank you so much.
I cannot wait for something that I really liked playing, and that's a reason enough to do it. Is that it's something you enjoy? Might as well get it, and I'm highly recommending it to everyone. Whether that means anything, if the seal of approval or not here, gentlemen, we'll find out. So, all right, let me do CloudBot here. I'm hitting wrong buttons all the time. Giveaways, here we go. Closing it out. First winner. The first winner is Hager the Horrible. Hager, do you have Eberron? All right, so I know Hager. And the second winner is Cardman. So, Hager, let me know if you have it. If not, it goes to Cardman. And let me know if Cardman, if you have it. So, I'm trying to Cardman. Do you have Eberron? In case Hager does already, let me know. Both. I know you both, so we can get that going here. All right, we're gonna rate the Darling. She's crafting, and
He doesn't have it.
Who doesn't? Cardman.
Cardman.
All right, Cardman. If Hager doesn't respond, I know he's in chat. I'm going to send you the Eberron one no matter what. And then Hager, I'll send him a Greyhawk something. So, thank you both.
Yeah, guys. Thank you.
See
so
you
much.
all soon.
Oh,
and,
thank you.
Yes, and like I said, Keith, in the future, if you want me for playing a game on live stream or whatever, just ask. I'd be more than happy to play.
Absolutely.
So I know what I'm doing. That may help. I'd love to get Ed in a rematch. So
I would love to see it.
okay,
So
we can make that work. We can make that
we'll
work
figure
out.
it out.
All right,
Awesome.
cool. All right, let's.
All right.
Jay's gonna hit the wrong button here, and you guys have a great night. You guys can bolt. I'm just gonna raid into Darling. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, see you. Have a good one. All right, set the raid up for Darling. Please, let's all go in there. It's going with over 90. It'll be awesome. Great show, Anna. What do you think?
Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, it was great. It was a lot of cool nerdery.
Yeah, it was. It was a great discussion.
Yeah.
By the way, if you have a question where I go, we raid into people who are part of our Greyhawk stream team, always on priority. Please note that. Then, so if you want to become part of our stream team, just reach out to me. Wow, 98, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. See you Wednesday night for our next stream. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, popped over. 98 bit, that's good numbers. Yeah.